Beneath the restless surface of the world's oceans lie secrets that defy explanation, where light fades and silence reigns. In the depths, divers have stumbled upon vanished crews, unearthly lights, and objects that refuse decay, each anomaly a fragment of a puzzle the sea has long guarded. From hidden corridors and ghostly wrecks to enigmatic formations etched into sand and stone, these waters conceal stories that challenge both history and reason. As our journey descends into sunken ships, shifting currents and shadowed passages, the mysteries unfold with every dive, revealing phenomena that have haunted those who dare to explore them. In these shadowed depths, the familiar rules of the deep give way to the unknown, and every discovery pulls the investigation further into the unexplained. The Vanishing Divers of Blue Hole Dahab. The waters off Egypt's Sinai Peninsula often seem calm from a distance, their surface carrying only the faintest tremor of wind, yet beneath that composed exterior lies the vast vertical shaft known as the Blue Hole of Dahab, a place that divers across generations have come to regard with equal parts awe and quiet dread. This site, shaped by the slow erosion of ancient reefs and the collapse of limestone caverns, has long attracted those determined to test the limits of depth and endurance, but it is the recurring tragedy known as the Vanishing Divers of Blue Hole Dahab that shadows every descent. The phenomenon has accumulated its own unsettling gravity over the years, drawing in explorers, researchers, and seasoned instructors who all agree that too many disappearances remain unexplained, even after equipment checks, profile reviews, and exhaustive searches. Far from the bustle of Dahab's shoreline, the formation's deceptively inviting entrance seems to mute the world above, pulling divers into an abyss that has become a focal point for maritime mystery. Many begin their descent along the sloping reef wall, initially comforted by the clarity of the Red Sea and the presence of the surrounding daytime light, yet the transition into the featureless blue happens more abruptly than expected. The water grows colder, and the sense of spatial orientation begins to falter, as if the cavern gradually strips away the familiar indicators that divers rely on. What has made the Blue Hole so notorious is not just its depth, but the arch, a submerged tunnel that leads outward to the open sea, situated at a level where narcosis becomes more than a mild distortion of judgment. The arch appears serene when viewed from afar, a pale opening carved into shadowed limestone, though many divers describe a strange quietness that settles over them when they draw near. This region is where most disappearances occur, leading investigators to gather every detail possible from recovered equipment logs and fragmented dive footage. Yet the evidence consistently contradicts expectations and leaves more questions than answers. Some of the earliest documented vanishings involved expert divers with hundreds of logged descents, which amplified concern within the community. Their last recorded depths often showed no signs of emergency ascent or rapid descent profiles, and their tanks revealed gas consumption patterns that did not match panic or equipment malfunction. Marine biologists studying the surrounding seascape remark on the Blue Hole's unique structure, noting how its shape magnifies acoustics and produces faint, distorted echoes that are difficult to trace, adding another layer of disorientation. While none of these natural features fully account for the disappearances, they create an environment that feels subtly alive, an underwater chamber that warps sound and light in ways that have unsettled professional divers who rarely admit to unease. Those who return from the arch often recall a moment, brief but distinct, when their peripheral vision felt strangely unreliable, as if something moved at the edge of sight despite the apparent emptiness. Accounts from rescue divers further complicate the narrative. Search teams report sections of the cavern where visibility drops without warning, a sudden shift from crystalline clarity to suspended haze that appears and disappears with no tidal pattern. This effect is sometimes attributed to sediment and thermal layers, yet the phenomenon's unpredictability lends the site its eerie reputation. Some rescues have followed trails of scattered gear, each piece resting at inconsistent depths, suggesting a diver who became disoriented and moved erratically before vanishing completely. Curiously, lifelines and guide ropes placed to support training descents have been found looped in unusual formations, as if tugged or twisted by unseen currents that local experts insist do not exist in this part of the reef. The situation is made stranger by the fact that no significant marine predators frequent the Blue Hole, and no physical evidence points to biological interference. One of the more bewildering cases involved a diver whose camera, later recovered, revealed a sequence of frames showing perfectly normal descent procedures, followed by a stretch of footage dominated by nothing but empty blue extending in all directions. Investigators concluded that the diver likely entered the arch at the wrong angle, though the footage lacked any moment that clearly indicated confusion or deviation. When instructors reviewed the precise position of the final frames, they found the camera must have been oriented in a direction that should have captured the rock wall, yet no structure appeared. The absence of even a shadow or contour raised quite speculation among the more superstitious members of the diving community, though researchers caution against reading too much into a device known to malfunction under pressure. Still, the peculiar blankness of the recording continues to unsettle those familiar with the blue hole's layout. Each year, efforts to improve safety protocols grow more rigorous, and professional guides in Dahab emphasize the importance of strict depth planning, trimix usage, and clear orientation strategies. Even so, the mystery persists because the incidents that cannot be explained refuse to fit familiar patterns. Some divers recount hearing distant metallic tapping when deep within the arch, though marine geologists argue that shifting rock structures can create similar sounds as trapped air escapes or fractures settle. Yet those who experience the noises disagree, describing a rhythm too deliberate to be natural. Others report sensing a faint pressure change, a moment when the surrounding water feels subtly heavier, as though the cavern is adjusting around their presence. These impressions rarely appear in official documentation, but they circulate quietly in conversations between those who have spent years navigating the blue hole's depths. The geography of the site adds one final complication. The arch opens into the open sea at a depth where sunlight becomes a muted glow, and the channel between the reef and the outer drop-off creates complex light gradients that can confuse even experienced divers. This interplay of shadow and shifting brightness has sparked theories about visual illusions, amplified by nitrogen narcosis, making divers misjudge distance or orientation. However, the recorded data from several vanishings does not support significant narcosis at the depths involved, leaving the community divided. Some believe the blue hole behaves differently from other caverns due to its unique alignment with the prevailing currents. Others speak of its gravity-like pull, a sensation that draws divers farther than intended before they fully realise how far they've drifted. As the years pass, the blue hole of Dahab maintains its paradoxical reputation as both a place of extraordinary beauty and a site burdened by unanswered questions. Its vertical chamber continues to attract those who seek the thrill of depth, while the stories of vanished divers linger like a presence just outside the beam of a torch. For all the studies, mapping projects, and careful reconstructions, the core of the mystery remains untouched, preserved within the cavern's patient silence. And so the divers who return to the surface speak softly of the feeling that something still waits in the depths where the missing were last seen, watching from the quiet blue just beyond sight. The ghost lights of Truk Lagoon. Fragments of wartime machinery lie scattered across the floor of Truk Lagoon, forming a silent landscape where rusted steel still resembles the outlines of lives cut short. The remains of shattered hulls, collapsed decks, and twisted beams stretch across the seabed like the relics of a drowned museum, each one marked by corrosion, yet unmistakably shaped by human intent. Divers move through this still expanse with careful strokes, knowing the weight of history held in every shadow. Among these remnants sits the mystery that brought so many of them here, in quiet fascination, the phenomenon known as the ghost lights of Truk Lagoon, a presence reported in whispers across decades of exploration. Within this suspended stillness, the lights become part of the scenery, as much a fixture of the lagoon as the wrecks themselves, yet no one has ever found a certainty that explains their steady, drifting glow. What remains of Operation Hailstone's devastation endures in these wrecks, each one preserving a moment from 1944 as if time decided not to move past that day. The list of vessels lost during the 2 days of bombing still reads like an inventory of an entire fleet. The Fujikawa Maru lying on her port side, the Shinkoku Maru settled upright with its superstructure intact, and the Hoki Maru resting in near-perfect silhouette except for the ruptured hull where bombs punctured its midsection. Inside some cabins, tables are still bolted to floors, drawers remain partly open, and bottles sit upright beneath fine layers of silt. The sense of interrupted normality fills these compartments with a strange gravity, as though the lagoon has preserved them not only as wrecks, but as scenes left waiting for someone to return. Against this backdrop of suspended history, the appearance of drifting light takes on a significance that feels neither random nor easily dismissed. Among these underwater ruins, divers have long described soft glimmers that drift through companionways and collapsed decks with an unsettling steadiness. Some say the lights move in deliberate arcs, gliding across cargo holds with a slow, measured pace that suggests intention rather than accident. Others describe orbs that pause above personal artifacts, helmets, boots, ration tins, before slipping into rooms no dive light could reach. These reports rarely arrive with the urgency of fear. Instead, they are recounted with the quiet perplexity of observers who know the difference between natural light scatter and something far more controlled. The glimmers never dart, never strobe, never behave like plankton or disturbed sediment. They simply move, patient and unhurried, as if following a logic only they understand. Attempts to explain these glows often begin with the lagoon's unusual environmental conditions, yet each proposed cause dissolves under closer scrutiny. Truk Lagoon's protective reef creates a sheltered body of water with limited tidal disruption, making its depths clearer and calmer than many other wreck diving sites. Light can travel farther here, reflecting faintly off metallic debris or drifting particles, but the ghost lights do not match these natural effects. Thermoclines, known to distort perception, cannot produce self-moving illumination. Bioluminescent plankton, common in many coastal waters, flicker and scatter in response to motion, but these glows remain stable and untethered to diver movement. Even suspended rust, which often reflects torchlight in brief flashes, cannot mimic the slow, autonomous drifting that witnesses describe. The more divers try to categorize the phenomenon, the more the lights resist being placed within any familiar framework. One of the most quietly discussed encounters involved a diver surveying the Shinkoku Maru's infirmary, where a pale orb passed through a sealed doorway as though the metal offered no resistance. The diver, accustomed to the distortions caused by both depth and silt, remained certain that no other light source was present. The infirmary, known for its preserved surgical tables and scattered instruments, was already a place where history felt startlingly immediate. As the glow drifted across the room, it illuminated the rusted tools resting on the counters with a faint bluish cast, clinging to the edges of scalpels and syringes before continuing forward. When it reached the doorway that remained sealed by decades of corrosion, it did not waver or diminish. It simply continued moving, slipping into darkness as though the barrier held no meaning. The diver surfaced with the same controlled composure with which he approached every wreck, yet that moment settled into his memory with a weight he could not shake. Reports frequently concentrate on the lagoon's interior spaces, where preserved artifacts and shadow-filled rooms seem to invite the lingering presence of these lights. Divers exploring engine rooms describe glows settling near massive pistons or drifting past telegraph wheels still frozen in place. In cargo holds filled with scattered supplies, from gas masks to crates of tools, the lights sometimes hover above the objects as if observing them, casting a muted reflection on the metal surfaces below. Even in the galleys, where pots remain stacked in corroded cabinets and tiled walls, still hold fragments of their original patterns. The glimmers move with the same peculiar deliberation. These sightings rarely occur in open water. They belong almost exclusively to the interiors, where the past remains closest to its original shape. The vessels themselves seem to attract the phenomenon, as though their corridors retain something unseen that responds to the quiet approach of divers. Over the decades, accounts of the ghost lights have accumulated from divers using different techniques, equipment, and routes, creating a pattern too consistent to dismiss. Veteran wreck explorers, novice divers, technical teams, and underwater photographers have all reported similar sightings, despite visiting different wrecks under varying conditions. A few have attempted to capture the lights on video, but the footage always returns indistinct, showing only vague shifts in brightness or nothing at all. Some testimonies mention seeing more than one glow at a time, drifting in parallel paths through companionways or rising toward the ceilings of cargo holds before vanishing. Others describe lights that seem to follow the contour of a corridor, tracing its length without deviating from the invisible path. These patterns give the phenomenon a rhythm that feels almost choreographed, yet without a single explanation that satisfies both science and experience. Across the lagoon's vast sprawl of wreckage, the stillness of sunken corridors and abandoned cargo holds deepens the unease surrounding these unexplained illuminations. Rooms sealed since 1944 remain filled with artifacts untouched by currents, and the quiet there feels heavier than in open water. The ghost lights, appearing in these preserved chambers, seem to intertwine with the history etched into the metal, drifting through spaces where voices, footsteps, and machinery once filled the air. Efforts to trace their origins through environmental studies, diver logs, or biological surveys have yielded nothing definitive. The lagoon holds its mysteries with the same patience it holds its wrecks, offering no more clarity now than it did when the first divers reported the lights decades ago. A faint luminescence is still said to wander through those hollow steel corridors, as if something within the wrecks continues to remember its own vanished world. The unmarked submarine of the Norwegian deep. In the dimly lit operations room of a Norwegian naval base, monitors displayed nothing but blank grids, yet on a February night of 1996, one signal made every operator lean closer. The deep sonar network, part of a Cold War-era listening system designed to track submarine movements across the Norwegian Sea, had picked up a propulsion signature that did not match any known vessel. The equipment was sensitive enough to differentiate the hum of a diesel-electric from a nuclear reactor, the cadence of propeller blades from the irregular pulse of experimental craft, and yet this reading defied all categorization. Naval commanders briefed on the anomaly referred to it internally as the unmarked submarine, a designation as clinical as it was unnerving, reflecting both the mystery of its origin and the absence of any visual confirmation. Beneath the surface, the Norwegian deep stretches in near-endless valleys, a labyrinth of underwater ridges, steep drop-offs, and isolated trenches where the ocean behaves unlike any surface or coastal water. Sound channels bend and refract through temperature layers, and the pressure at depths exceeding 600 meters compresses both vessel and instrumentation into exacting limits. These conditions make the area both a natural haven and a challenge for detection. Even the most advanced submarines of the late 20th century were limited by hull integrity and acoustic signatures. Operating at these depths required specialized engineering. Yet the signal recorded that night indicated a vessel not only surviving but moving in ways that contradicted known physics, gliding through layers of pressure and density as if unconcerned by the very constraints that govern underwater travel. The hydrophones recorded a propulsion signature unlike any catalogue diesel-electric or nuclear submarine, a pattern that accelerated and slowed without explanation. Analysts noted the absence of identifiable mechanical rhythms, the subtle gaps between pulses that would normally indicate propeller rotation or engine hum. Unlike typical submarine traffic, which follows known transit routes along the continental shelf or toward naval bases, this object seemed to shift unpredictably, darting laterally and then halting at depth intervals that no mapped seabed feature would require. The recording itself carried a faint harmonic undertone that did not correspond to any known machinery, as if the vessel's movement generated a resonance from hull vibration or something entirely unknown. The more experts examined the data, the less it resembled human engineering. Naval vessels were dispatched immediately, tracing the source with sonar sweeps and infrared scans, yet the water revealed no trail, no shadow, and no thermal disturbance. Surface vessels deployed multi-beam echo sounders, and reconnaissance aircraft scanned for wakes or oil sheens, yet the anomaly left no physical mark. Even the most sensitive magnetometers failed to detect the signature of a hull passing beneath. Crews conducting systematic searches reported the eerie sensation of being observed, a subtle perception amplified by the silence of the deep and the blank expanses around them. Days of tracking yielded nothing, leaving only the original acoustic data as proof that something had existed, moved, and then vanished without a trace. Analysts turned to Cold War records, comparing the depth, speed, and hull vibrations against every known Russian, British, and American submarine, finding none capable of such maneuvering at that pressure. Nuclear attack subs could achieve endurance and power, but even they had operational limits. Diesel-electric vessels were far shallower. Technical manuals indicated maximum hull stress tolerances, propulsion efficiency curves, and sonar profiles, none of which aligned with the irregular deep-moving signature recorded that night. Intelligence officers speculated about clandestine technology, experimental crafts built in secrecy, yet no public records or credible leaks have ever surfaced to explain the incident. The classification of the data only heightened speculation, as the event remained obscured behind layers of security clearance. Post-event examinations revealed subtle irregularities in the acoustic data, brief harmonic pulses, gaps in motion, and a disappearance at a depth that should have been unsurvivable. Engineers and naval acoustic specialists puzzled over these inconsistencies, attempting to simulate the signature with known submarine models. Some theorized about new propulsion systems, silent drive innovations, or hull modifications, but each simulation fell short. Others proposed environmental explanations, underwater currents, thermal layering, and acoustic anomalies, yet these could not account for the precise intervals and speed changes noted. The more the experts modelled, the more the incident seemed to defy conventional understanding, a recorded pattern without a known source. Years later, oceanographers proposed theories involving subsea floor resonance and sound channel anomalies, yet these scientific explanations could not reproduce the movement or consistency recorded that night. The ocean's geology, with its faults, sediment layers, and underwater ridges, does create acoustic phenomena, but the patterns generated by these natural effects are chaotic and inconsistent. They rarely mimic mechanical propulsion, and they certainly cannot explain the object's sudden disappearance at extreme depth. Even the most advanced modelling software of the early 2000s struggled to account for a source moving as deliberately as the recorded signature suggested. The mystery remained. A signal that obeyed no natural law and no known engineering limit, yet left a perfectly traceable record across multiple hydrophone arrays. Portions of the report remain sealed, the hydrophone logs are partially missing, and the only official note refers to the object simply as unmarked and non-conforming. Researchers, journalists, and independent analysts have since pieced together fragments of testimony and documentation, but gaps in the record preserve the intrigue. Every reconstructed timeline of the event highlights a sudden appearance, calculated movement, and abrupt disappearance. The Norwegian authorities have never provided a public explanation, only confirming that the anomaly occurred and that standard naval responses failed to locate a vessel. These omissions leave an unsettling impression that the Norwegian deep harbours more than just water and seabed. It may conceal a presence that operates entirely outside known parameters. The Norwegian deep continues to be monitored with constant vigilance, a silent expanse that could conceal a repeat of that inexplicable passage at any moment. Modern sonar networks, satellite-linked detection systems, and continuous acoustic monitoring stand ready, yet no combination of human vigilance or technology guarantees that what happened once cannot happen again. Even with decades of research, the Cold War-era incident remains a reference point for those who study deep-sea anomalies, a stark reminder that the ocean, in its darkest depths, may hide craft or phenomena entirely unknown to science or navies alike. Somewhere in that cold and uncharted depth, a vessel once passed unseen, leaving only questions to echo through the water. The silent choir of the SS Yongala. The SS Yongala rests almost perfectly intact on the seabed off the Queensland coast, a grave frozen in coral where divers have reported a faint haunting resonance known as the silent choir. The wreck lies in roughly 29 metres of water, oriented slightly to starboard, its decks largely intact despite over a century submerged. For those who descend into its silent corridors, the ship feels less like an object and more like a repository of memory, an acoustic vessel that sometimes seems to sing through the currents. Divers who linger near the bridge or engine room describe vibrations that rise without warning, tonal hums that defy any mechanical explanation, as though the ship itself carries the echoes of the lives lost during the cyclone of 1911. Launched in 1903, the ship plied the waters between Melbourne and Cairns, a proud passenger and cargo vessel of the Australian coastal fleet, until a cyclone swept her off course and sank her entirely. The disaster claimed all 122 people aboard, leaving no survivors to tell the tale. Historical records note that her hull was steel, with twin engines capable of moderate speed, and her passenger cabins were typical of the era's comfort. The loss of the Yongala remains one of Australia's most significant maritime tragedies, and the ship's resting place was unknown for 73 years until discovered by divers in 1958. Yet even after mapping and exploration, a different kind of mystery emerged, one that is not tied to the wreck's position or condition, but to what seems to emanate from it in sound. Over a century beneath the waves has allowed coral, sponges and soft sediment to embrace the steel hull, preserving both structure and the peculiar acoustics that ripple through its decks. The superstructure remains upright in many sections, and beams, stairways and railings cast shadows through the filtered sunlight. The materials themselves, metal, timber and rivets, interact with water movement, creating natural amplification and resonance. Currents flow through corridors like invisible organ pipes, and divers often notice that even gentle tides can alter the acoustic environment within the wreck. Yet the hums reported as the silent choir appear irregularly, not in accordance with tides or current direction, suggesting that their origin may extend beyond purely physical explanation. Divers describe tonal vibrations that rise from the wreck in unpredictable pulses, low hums that seem to emanate from empty cabins, engine rooms and cargo holds. Some hear short melodic sequences lasting only a few seconds, while others report continuous vibrations that fade gradually into the surrounding silence. These sounds have been observed at different times of day, under varying weather conditions, and with no apparent correlation to diver activity. Equipment fails to reproduce them consistently, and in some instances multiple divers in different positions within the wreck report perceiving the same sequence simultaneously, a phenomenon that complicates naturalistic explanations and adds an almost sentient quality to the experience. Currents funneling through narrow corridors, gas escaping from sediment, and metallic reverberations all provide possible explanations, yet none fully account for the choir's irregular cadence and harmonic qualities. The wreck lies on a sediment layer capable of releasing pockets of gas over time, and metallic hulls naturally resonate with vibrations. Even marine life can generate tonal frequencies. However, the intervals, pitch and duration reported by divers remain inconsistent with these mechanisms, occurring in spaces too large or acoustically dampened for such resonance to carry. Attempts to link the sounds to environmental factors such as tidal cycles or barometric pressure have similarly yielded inconclusive results, leaving the phenomenon suspended between science and speculation. Attempts to record the sounds with hydrophones and underwater microphones reveal anomalies that confound even sensitive equipment, capturing tones that appear briefly before fading into silence. Technical teams have documented short bursts of harmonic frequencies that seem to originate from the midship corridor, only to vanish before analysis can confirm their source. In other instances, recordings capture low-frequency vibrations in the engine room, though the mechanisms that could produce them naturally are absent. Repeated trials fail to replicate the phenomenon reliably, creating an uneasy pattern. The choir is perceivable to human senses in situ, but nearly impossible to quantify or document through technology. The wreck is home to schools of fish, crustaceans and marine mammals, some capable of producing sound, yet the choir often coincides with empty corridors far from any living source. Large snapper and grouper navigate the wreck, and crustaceans create soft clicks and taps, but divers consistently note that the tonal qualities of these animals do not match the harmonic and sequential nature of the choir. Occasionally, divers report observing the behaviour of marine life subtly altered in proximity to the vibrations, fish scattering, crabs retreating, but these responses occur without any visible sound-producing activity, intensifying the impression of an unseen, intelligent source. In the quiet of the Yongala's submerged corridors, the interplay of human history and natural processes creates a layered atmosphere, one in which memory and sound seem to coexist inextricably. The cyclone that sank the ship, the lives lost, and the objects preserved by the seabed all combine with the underwater acoustics to create a haunting environment. Divers sense a narrative embedded in the vibrations, as if the ship itself recalls the moment it was overwhelmed by waves, translating memory into tone. The blending of historical tragedy, structural resonance, and biological activity produces a phenomenon that is at once explainable in part, yet wholly mysterious in its totality. Today the site remains fully protected, yet divers occasionally emerge speaking of tones and vibrations that defy explanation, echoing across a century of sunken tragedy. Marine biologists, archaeologists, and underwater photographers continue to visit the wreck, cataloguing coral growth, surveying the hull and recording wildlife. Yet the choir persists, revealing that despite scientific knowledge, technology, and careful study, the ship's acoustic mysteries endure. The sound, faint and ephemeral, becomes a bridge between past and present, human loss and the ocean's slow reclamation, leaving each visitor with the sense that the wreck is alive in ways that cannot be reduced to facts alone. Beneath the shifting coral and rusted steel, the silent choir waits, as if the wreck itself remembers the voices it once carried. The black silhouette beneath the Doria. The Doria rests at a severe list off Nantucket Shoals, her steel hull broken in places, and divers have long whispered of a dark silhouette glimpsed in her shadowed corridors. The great ocean liner, once a symbol of luxury and modern engineering, now lies twisted and tilted beneath 73 metres of water. For those who venture inside her fractured compartments, the wreck becomes a labyrinth of steel and shadow, where beams, stairwells, and collapsed cabins create visual ambiguity. Several divers report fleeting glimpses of a humanoid-like shape, drifting silently through passages and around bulkheads, sometimes appearing at the periphery of vision and vanishing before it can be fully observed. The phenomenon has earned the sobriquet the Black Silhouette, a presence that haunts even the most experienced wreck explorers. Commissioned in 1951, the Doria represented one of Italy's most prestigious liners, boasting twin engines, modern safety features, and accommodations for over 1,200 passengers. On a foggy night in July 1956, she collided with the Swedish passenger liner Stockholm, sustaining catastrophic damage along her starboard side. In the ensuing chaos, 46 lives were lost, and the vessel sank within hours, leaving behind only a broken memory of its grandeur and the tragedy it had witnessed. Divers approaching the wreck are often struck by the knowledge of that human history, a backdrop of catastrophe that imbues the underwater environment with a weight of quiet dread. Even today, plaques and memorials mark the site above water, while below, the wreck serves as both a historical artifact and a canvas for mystery. Lying roughly 73 metres below the surface, the wreck tilts dramatically, her decks fractured, stairwells obstructed, and superstructure compromised in ways that create pockets of shadow and turbulence. Currents sweep through interior corridors in unpredictable patterns, carrying silt and detritus that obscure visibility and complicate orientation. The interior is narrow and maze-like, with bulkheads blocking passage and corridors collapsed under the weight of decades. Divers must navigate with care, using guidelines and precise buoyancy, yet even the most methodical approaches cannot prevent the sudden encounters with shadowy shapes that seem to drift independently of currents or diver movement. The wreck itself acts as a prism of light and darkness, amplifying perception and obscuring certainty. Divers recount fleeting glimpses of a black figure drifting through stairwells or around collapsed bulkheads, sometimes captured only as blurred shapes in photographs. These sightings are often peripheral, seen from the corner of the eye or beneath flickering torchlight. Some divers describe a slow, purposeful motion, as if the figure moves intentionally through corridors, while others report seeing the silhouette linger near collapsed cabins before disappearing entirely. Photographic evidence is inconsistent. Blurs appear on frames and vanish on review, giving rise to speculation and unease. Yet across decades, reports remain remarkably consistent, suggesting a phenomenon experienced repeatedly rather than imagined. Low-light conditions, optical distortion through masks, and the absorption of sunlight at depth all contribute to perception errors, yet these explanations fail to account for the consistency and scale of reported sightings. Sunlight diminishes rapidly at 70 metres, leaving only faint residual blue tones, and artificial lights introduce glare and shadow that can distort perspective. Divers' eyes adjust to dimness in ways that amplify contrast and depth ambiguity, occasionally transforming structural elements into humanoid shapes. Yet when multiple divers witness the silhouette simultaneously, or when cameras capture anomalous forms independent of human presence, conventional explanations fall short, leaving the phenomenon partially unexplained. Interior currents, eddies formed by structural collapse, and suspended silt can momentarily create humanoid shapes, but careful observation often reveals anomalies moving against the water rather than with it. Heavy objects, steel plates and stairwells interact with currents to produce unpredictable patterns in suspended particles, sometimes generating the illusion of motion. However, the reported silhouette often maintains coherence and scale inconsistent with drifting debris. Divers sometimes note that the figure appears to respond to their movement, retreating into shadow or emerging from areas inaccessible to waterborne debris. This interplay between physical environment and perceived agency contributes to the sense of an intelligent or sentient presence. Cameras and dive lights occasionally record dark forms where no diver is present, leaving technicians puzzled by blurs and shadows that vanish when equipment is re-examined. Film reels, digital video, and underwater photographs have all captured anomalies, often in stairwells, corridors, or near collapsed bulkheads. Analysts note that lighting angles, backscatter, and particulate matter cannot fully explain the consistency of shape, proportion, and motion across multiple recordings. Technical investigations confirm that cameras were properly calibrated and that no diver or tethered object could have caused the appearance, reinforcing the sense that the silhouette is neither artifact nor coincidence. The Andrea Doria's reputation as a tragic and iconic ship amplifies every encounter. Decades of lore, fatalities, and near misses imbue the wreck with a psychological resonance that cannot be ignored. Divers enter with awareness of the ship's history, the stories of lost lives, and the countless warnings from predecessors about interior hazards. This historical weight interacts with perceptual phenomena, creating a layered experience in which memory, imagination, and environment converge. Even experienced wreck explorers acknowledge that navigating the Andrea Doria is not solely a technical endeavour. It is an engagement with history, shadow, and uncertainty. Modern exploration continues under strict protocols, yet divers report the same silhouette drifting just beyond torchlight, a presence both elusive and undeniable. Safety measures, including guidelines, restricted penetration, and communication lines, have reduced accidents but have not diminished reports of the black silhouette. Researchers, underwater photographers, and historians continue to examine the wreck with scientific rigour, yet the phenomenon persists. Each dive into the Andrea Doria remains a confrontation with both known history and unknown presence, a space where observation and mystery intersect, leaving divers with a sensation that the wreck itself retains a form of silent consciousness. Buried under fractured steel and drifting silt, the black silhouette lingers, as though the wreck holds a secret beyond human comprehension. The disappearing statue of Curacao. A diver finned cautiously along Curaçao's northern reef, eyes scanning the coral shadows where the statue had been seen moments before, only to find it had vanished again. The figure, reportedly a carved human form roughly life-sized, had been observed intermittently by divers for decades, appearing as if summoned by the currents and disappearing just as quickly into the folds of the reef. The diver paused near a limestone overhang, shining a torch into the crevices, yet the statue remained elusive, an enigma that defied both expectation and previous observation. Beneath the sunlit surface, the reef stretched endlessly, a tangle of overhangs, channels, and coral gardens that seemed to hide more than they revealed. The statue's repeated disappearance had earned it a quiet notoriety among local dive guides, many of whom treated sightings as both rare and unsettling, leaving even seasoned explorers questioning the reliability of their own eyes. Believed to date from the island's colonial era, the statue is thought to reflect European craftsmanship brought through maritime trade, though no records definitively trace its origin. Stylistically, it resembles small devotional figures that were common aboard ships or in colonial households, yet its precise purpose remains uncertain. Some speculate that it may have been jettisoned intentionally or lost during a storm, while others propose it was part of a submerged collection of maritime artifacts that settled unpredictably across the reef. The lack of documentation makes historical attribution nearly impossible, leaving divers and researchers to rely on stylistic analysis, photographic evidence, and diver testimonies to reconstruct its provenance. The uncertainty surrounding its history only deepens the mystery of its apparent mobility, as though the ocean itself were curating a collection too elusive to catalogue. The reef itself is a labyrinth of limestone outcrops, overhangs, and channels, where shifting sand and strong currents can conceal objects or create illusions of movement. Visibility varies dramatically, with patches of sediment stirred by passing divers reducing perception to mere meters in certain areas. Seasonal storms and tidal fluctuations further alter the reef's topography, occasionally burying objects under layers of sand or revealing previously hidden crevices. The coral grows thickly on protruding surfaces, blending colour, texture and shape in ways that can obscure even the most conspicuous items. Within this dynamic environment, the statue's apparent disappearance could be partly attributed to the reef's natural processes, though the phenomenon often occurs in conditions that seem too calm or predictable to explain the complete vanishing of a substantial object. Eyewitness accounts describe the figure reappearing in different locations, sometimes upright and partially buried, other times tilted or obscured by coral, as though the sea itself were repositioning it. Divers consistently report that the statue seems to migrate, often appearing hours or days after its last sighting, sometimes in areas previously explored without incident. The irregularity of these appearances has confounded mapping efforts, as coordinates logged on one day often fail to match subsequent observations. Even experienced divers, familiar with the currents and tides, are left questioning whether they are witnessing the same artifact or a different one entirely. Each sighting reinforces the sense that the statue is not merely lost beneath the waves, but inhabits a space where movement and stillness converge in unpredictable ways. Subtle oceanic forces, tides, microcurrents, and sediment flows can move objects across the seabed, yet many disappearances occur without detectable environmental triggers. The reef's channels can funnel sand and silt with surprising velocity, producing temporary shifts in the seafloor that may expose or hide objects. However, dive logs often note calm conditions during periods when the statue vanished or reappeared, suggesting that natural movement alone cannot fully account for the phenomenon. In certain cases, the statue has been reported in elevated positions on small outcrops, resting above areas of sediment that could not have carried it naturally. These observations reinforce the notion that, for all its plausibility as a displaced artifact, the statue's mobility remains partially unexplained. Archaeologists and divers have attempted to map and photograph the statue meticulously, yet images rarely match reports, and repeated surveys often fail to locate it at the same coordinates. High-resolution sonar mapping and photogrammetry have documented large sections of the reef, yet the statue's position continues to elude comprehensive recording. Researchers note inconsistencies in size, perception and angle of view, compounded by visibility constraints and the dense reef structure. Even with modern technology, the object seems to resist definitive cataloguing, appearing in some frames only to vanish from others, as if the reef itself participates in a subtle shifting performance. Colonies of coral, sponges and burrowing organisms gradually transform the statue's contours, sometimes rendering it nearly invisible or blending it with surrounding reef structures. Incrustation accumulates slowly, masking details of the figure while simultaneously creating the impression of age and permanence. Small fish dart through crevices, and tiny invertebrates cling to every exposed surface, introducing minute movements that can create optical illusions when observed from a distance. The cumulative effect is that the statue seems to breathe with the reef, emerging and retreating in tandem with the growth and decay of its environment. The statue has become a source of fascination, drawing divers and researchers alike, who are captivated by the tension between verifiable observation and elusive presence. Local lore has imbued it with a near mythical status, and dive operators often caution visitors about its unpredictability. Scientific studies have focused on reef dynamics, sediment movement, and artifact preservation, but these efforts only reinforce the mystery, demonstrating that while some aspects are explainable, the statue's apparent mobility remains unaccounted for. Each dive into its vicinity offers a new tableau of discovery, anticipation, and uncertainty, blending natural history with human curiosity in a setting that is both tangible and ephemeral. Despite decades of dives and modern mapping technology, the statue continues to appear and vanish, a silent witness to the reef's shifting sands and centuries of maritime history. Divers leave the site with photographs, notes, and stories, yet few can claim certainty regarding its exact location at any given time. The object persists as both a historical artifact and an enduring enigma, challenging expectations about permanence beneath the waves and the reliability of observation in complex marine environments. It is a mystery that defies simple resolution, bridging centuries of human history with the dynamic unpredictability of the ocean floor. Under the constant motion of coral and sediment, the statue hovers in silence, a relic as elusive as the secrets it preserves. The Baltic Sea anomaly. In 2011, the Ocean X diving team detected a formation on the Baltic Sea floor that immediately defied expectations, prompting sonar scans that revealed its unusual geometric contours. The initial sonar images showed a circular structure resting on the seabed, its smooth surfaces contrasting sharply with the surrounding glacial deposits. Divers and researchers approached with a mixture of caution and curiosity, noting that the anomaly seemed to rise unnaturally from the sediment, with sharp edges and depressions that suggested intentional shaping rather than natural formation. Even before direct observation, the report sparked intrigue among the diving community, who described the object in terms that blurred the line between geological oddity and potential artifact. As the team prepared for a close-up examination, the Baltic's cold waters and low visibility heightened the sense of isolation, amplifying the tension between discovery and uncertainty. Measurements indicated a circular structure approximately 60 meters across, resting nearly 92 meters beneath the surface, with smooth ridges and abrupt ledges that diverged from natural seabed patterns. The object appeared almost disc-like in aerial sonar views, with concentric formations and apparent depressions radiating outward from its center. The consistency of shape across multiple scans suggested permanence and scale, reinforcing the anomaly's distinction from the surrounding sediment and rocky outcrops. Researchers noted irregularities in density readings, where certain areas registered higher solidity, while adjacent zones appeared hollow or concave. These characteristics fueled speculation, yet all documented data remained precise and replicable, emphasizing that the anomaly was neither a transient formation nor a sonar artifact. The Baltic Sea itself is a remnant of glacial epochs, with sediment layers, clay deposits, and low salinity currents creating an environment where such a formation should have been impossible according to standard geological models. The seabed consists primarily of glacial moraine, clay, and post-glacial sediments that tend to form irregular undulating landscapes. Deep currents move slowly through the region, and tidal activity is limited, providing little force capable of sculpting uniform circular features of this scale. Oceanographic records confirm that the anomaly's placement is unusually flat relative to the surrounding seabed, with no apparent source of disturbance that could account for its distinctive shape. The glacial history of the area further complicates explanations, as no comparable formations have been documented in similar sedimentary environments throughout the Baltic Basin. Divers approaching the anomaly reported stark contrasts in texture, noticing flat surfaces, depressions, and angular features unlike the surrounding glacial rock, challenging conventional expectations of natural formations. Underwater visibility, often limited to a few meters, made close inspection difficult, yet divers consistently described a flat top with sharply defined edges and structures resembling terraces or steps along the perimeter. The anomaly's surface did not bear the roughness typical of eroded glacial stone. Instead, it appeared unusually smooth, as if worn or crafted. Shadows cast by diver lights accentuated ledges and ridges, creating the impression of deliberate design. Even with careful measurement and photographic documentation, the formation resisted clear categorization, leaving investigators uncertain whether they were observing a natural geological phenomenon or something more enigmatic. Geologists and oceanographers proposed several explanations, from glacial erosion and gas release to an ancient shipwreck, yet each hypothesis failed to account for the anomaly's combination of scale, symmetry, and texture. Glacial erosion could produce rounded boulders or depressions, but the observed terraces and angular ledges did not match known glacial patterns. Gas erosion might explain some concavities, yet the scale of uniformity remained inconsistent with such processes. Likewise, while shipwreck remnants occur throughout the Baltic, no records indicate a vessel of corresponding size or structure that could account for the formation. Each scientific theory addressed some aspects while leaving others unresolved, reinforcing the sense of mystery surrounding the site. Remotely operated vehicles and sonar imaging revealed stair-like depressions and layered ridges, recording density variations that added complexity to the already perplexing structure. ROV footage captured sections of the formation that appeared elevated above the surrounding seabed, with abrupt drop-offs and smooth, rounded surfaces intersecting with angular features. Side-scan sonar suggested uniformity in outer edges, while photogrammetry highlighted anomalies inconsistent with natural rock formations. Technical teams noted that some depressions were too precise to be explained by sedimentary processes alone, yet no conclusive evidence of human construction or modification emerged. Every dive and survey reinforced the anomaly's uniqueness, making it one of the Baltic Sea's most enigmatic discoveries. Strong but localized currents and shifting sediment occasionally obscure sections of the anomaly, creating illusions of movement or additional features that complicate direct observation. Fine silt stirred by even minimal water motion can temporarily cover ledges or fill depressions, producing transient shapes that vanish as conditions stabilize. During storms or tidal shifts, small sections of sediment are displaced, further altering the visual impression of the formation. Yet even under calm conditions, divers report consistent observations of ledges, terraces, and flat surfaces, suggesting that environmental factors alone cannot explain the anomaly's distinctive features. The interplay between stable structure and shifting sediment contributes to both fascination and frustration among investigators. Media attention and documentary coverage amplified public fascination, while online speculation ranged from submerged extraterrestrial artifacts to lost civilizations. Though researchers maintain a strictly analytical perspective, news outlets and documentaries presented the anomaly in dramatic terms, emphasizing the visual oddity and apparent symmetry, while scientific publications addressed geological and oceanographic data. Diver blogs and expedition journals offer detailed first-hand accounts, noting both the consistency of certain features and the uncertainty surrounding their origin. Despite sensationalized interpretations, all reliable investigation underscores the anomaly's tangible presence and the persistent inability of current science to fully explain its existence. After countless dives and meticulous sonar mapping, the anomaly continues to elude categorization, its origins uncertain even to seasoned researchers. Each survey adds fragments of data, precise measurements, visual impressions, and density readings, yet no model fully accounts for the combination of size, symmetry, and surface texture. The formation sits in quiet isolation beneath the Baltic's grey waters, an enduring puzzle that invites speculation while evading resolution. For divers and researchers, it is a site where curiosity, observation, and uncertainty converge in the most literal sense, a reminder that the ocean still harbours mysteries beyond immediate comprehension. Suspended in the Baltic's icy depths, the formation maintains a rigid symmetry, a silent enigma sculpted by forces human or otherwise, awaiting those who seek its truth. The vanished research pod of Mariana's Fringe. At the edge of the Mariana Trench, a slender research pod descended into the abyss, its lights fading quickly into the unbroken darkness before all contact abruptly ceased. The pod had been deployed as part of a routine survey along the trench's less explored periphery, tasked with collecting high-resolution imagery, chemical profiles, and micro-pressure readings from one of the planet's most extreme environments. Operators on the surface monitored its descent with precision, noting that conditions were unusually calm for the area, yet a brief anomaly in the acoustic feed preceded the final transmission. Within minutes, the pod vanished from all monitoring systems, leaving no evidence of collision, mechanical failure, or environmental disturbance. The abrupt loss stunned the research team, casting a shadow over what was intended as a standard scientific mission. Engineered to withstand pressures exceeding 1,000 atmospheres, the pod carried high-resolution cameras, pressure sensors, and chemical analyzers designed to collect data from previously unreachable depths. Its titanium-hulled frame was reinforced to endure sudden impacts and temperature extremes, while onboard processors recorded continuous environmental data to be transmitted in real time or stored for delayed retrieval. The pod's mission had been carefully planned, with redundancy in communication lines and backup buoyancy controls intended to prevent total loss. Yet, despite this robust design, its disappearance suggested the presence of unknown factors beyond even the most sophisticated engineering safeguards. The very technology intended to ensure safety had failed to provide any explanation, intensifying both scientific concern and the air of mystery. The surrounding waters were frigid, nearly devoid of light, and coursed with unpredictable currents that twisted along steep trench walls, making navigation treacherous even for robotic explorers. Water temperatures hovered just above freezing, while narrow channels funneled microcurrents capable of shifting debris or subtly altering a pod's trajectory. Sediment layers, disrupted by glacial and tectonic activity over millennia, created pockets of unstable ground along the trench floor. Even with real-time sonar, visibility remained limited to a few meters, and the trench's vertical walls cast deep shadows that could conceal obstacles or distort perception. These conditions combined to create an environment where even the most controlled descent could encounter unanticipated challenges. Minutes before its disappearance, the pod transmitted readings that puzzled operators. Small pressure fluctuations, irregular sonar echoes, and visual anomalies that appeared momentarily on camera feeds. Operators noted brief distortions in the imagery, including faint glimmers along trench ridges and fleeting shadows that did not correspond to map topography. Acoustic sensors registered unusual echoes, some suggesting objects of significant size moving near the pod, yet no data confirmed a tangible contact. Each anomaly was fleeting and difficult to reconcile with natural causes, leaving the research team uncertain whether these were equipment artifacts, environmental quirks, or something entirely unknown lurking in the abyss. A coordinated search employed ROVs, sonar mapping, and triangulated acoustic pings, yet the vast expanse of sediment, crevices, and undersea ridges rendered every attempt painstakingly slow and often inconclusive. Search teams deployed high-frequency side-scan sonar to cover wide areas, while tethered ROVs attempted close visual inspection of promising coordinates. Despite exhaustive coverage, the trench's topography, steep drops, narrow canyons, and overhangs frustrated mapping efforts, and sediment stirred by each pass could obscure previously visible features. Days of searching revealed no trace of the pod, and even data cross-referenced with historical missions failed to illuminate the anomaly, reinforcing the sense that the object had vanished into a realm beyond reach. Mechanical failure, entanglement with debris, sudden currents, and the trench's jagged topography were all considered by engineers and oceanographers, yet none fully explained the pod's disappearance without a trace. High-pressure hydraulics and internal buoyancy systems were designed to compensate for most environmental fluctuations, yet every possible failure mode appeared inconsistent with the last recorded data. Currents, while present, would have required an improbable combination of direction and intensity to carry the pod away from its intended path. Even debris fields mapped nearby could not explain the lack of impact signatures or recovery of components. Each plausible hypothesis left unanswered questions, deepening the mystery surrounding the pod's disappearance. Surface operators and pilots of manned submersibles recalled subtle anomalies, glimmers of light or fleeting shapes in camera feeds, that hinted at phenomena beyond the capabilities of instrumentation alone. While the pod's recorded data had gaps, divers reported occasional observations of luminescent particles or shimmering reflections near the trench's edges, sometimes forming transient patterns across rock faces or sediment. These phenomena, never fully explained, contributed to the uncertainty surrounding the pod, suggesting that the deep-sea environment itself could produce optical effects or harbour unknown features affecting observation. Human interpretation of these brief glimpses blurred the line between environmental anomaly and potentially unexplained activity. The pod's disappearance has sparked ongoing debate within the scientific community, balancing rigorous skepticism with fascination over what might lie in the largely unexplored deep waters. Research papers emphasize mechanical and environmental explanations, while acknowledging that current technology cannot fully account for the pod's sudden absence. The incident has prompted revisions to deep-sea exploration protocols and reinforced awareness of the trench's extreme and unpredictable conditions. At the same time, it has ignited public imagination, inspiring documentaries, articles, and online discussions, further embedding the event into the lore of modern maritime mystery. Repeated missions and cutting-edge submersibles have yet to reveal the pod's final location, leaving only the ocean's unpredictable and relentless forces as witnesses. Each expedition adds incremental understanding of Mariana's edge, yet the area continues to conceal secrets that defy complete mapping or observation. The vanished pod stands as a stark reminder that, even with the most sophisticated instruments, the deep ocean remains a realm where human presence is fleeting and certainty elusive. In a world 11,000 meters below the surface, the vanished pod waits or floats, hidden from every instrument and observer. The drifting coffins of Chuuk. Truk Lagoon, once the fortress of Japan's Pacific Fleet, now harbours a quieter, more enigmatic presence. Coffins that seem to drift among the sunken wrecks, glimpsed by divers in the early morning light. The lagoon's waters are deceptively calm, yet beneath the surface lies a dense collection of sunken vessels, aircraft and cargo from the Second World War. Divers approaching the wrecks often report shapes in the periphery, dark and rectangular, moving slightly with the tide or wedged against coral-encrusted decks. These coffins, whether transported by accident, released from ships, or shifted by currents, occupy a liminal space between history and mystery, leaving investigators and casual observers alike questioning their origin and purpose. During the Second World War, the lagoon became a graveyard of steel and timber as aircraft, battleships and transport vessels were sunk, scattering cargo, and perhaps more, across the shallow channels. Japanese forces had fortified the lagoon, using it as a major naval anchorage, and it became a focal point for US bombing campaigns. Numerous transport ships were carrying not only equipment but human remains hastily interred or transported in sealed containers. The destruction left wreckage strewn across shallow bays, with debris hidden under silt, coral growth and fragmented hulls. Over the decades, these remnants have become both a historical record and a setting for unexplained sightings. Divers describe sudden encounters with coffin-shaped objects, some wedged between wreckage, others floating in shallow currents, their dark outlines contrasting sharply against the turquoise water. Reports note that these objects vary in size, some resembling traditional wooden coffins, others smaller containers that mimic the same rectangular form. Visibility is often limited to a few meters, yet even brief encounters leave lasting impressions as light refracts across the coral and sediment, exaggerating angles and shadows. The eeriness is compounded by the knowledge that many coffins in the lagoon could contain human remains displaced during wartime, adding a tangible weight to each observation. Tidal surges, shifting currents, and storm-driven waves carry debris unpredictably across the lagoon, explaining some movement while leaving other sightings difficult to reconcile with known oceanographic patterns. Local records indicate that sudden storms can dislodge heavy objects from wrecks, sending them floating for hours or even days before they settle again. Channels between islands create funneling effects, accelerating currents in narrow passages and sometimes lifting lighter objects from the seabed. While environmental physics accounts for much, it cannot explain the sporadic timing of sightings or why coffins sometimes appear far from any logical path of movement. The sunken vessels themselves create traps and conduits. Torn decks, open hatches, and scattered cargo provide pathways for objects to be displaced, sometimes resurfacing far from their original resting places. Over time, coral and marine growth have stabilized parts of the wrecks while leaving gaps in others. Coffins or rectangular objects lodged within hulls may eventually be freed by tidal pressure, decomposing wood or sediment movement. Each movement is small and imperceptible over days, yet cumulatively, it creates the occasional dramatic drift that divers witness, blending natural forces with a haunting sense of unpredictability. Oceanographers studying the lagoon have noted that seasonal monsoon patterns can stir deeper sediments and create transient upwellings, occasionally revealing objects long hidden beneath silt, including remnants of wooden coffins or crates. Submerged wood interacts with brackish water differently than steel, sometimes becoming buoyant enough to shift slowly along the seabed or rise slightly with currents. Divers have documented instances where partially buried coffins emerge after heavy rains or storm surges, only to vanish again once currents settle. These environmental interactions add a layer of unpredictability, suggesting that many sightings are not random but linked to the complex interplay of water movement, sediment, dynamics, and object buoyancy unique to Truk Lagoon. Local legends speak of spirits and ancestral guardians, while wartime records hint at hastily buried coffins transported by ship, intertwining history and folklore in ways that remain difficult to separate. Islanders recount tales of ghostly vessels carrying the dead, of objects that vanish and reappear with tides, and of restless spirits associated with the lagoon's wartime past. Oral history merges with documented transport of coffins and human remains, creating an atmosphere where diver experiences are interpreted through both rational and cultural lenses. The resulting narratives leave an impression that the lagoon itself guards secrets unwilling to be fully revealed. Scientific attempts to catalogue drifting coffins employ detailed mapping, underwater photography, and current modelling, yet the sporadic appearances and dynamic nature of the lagoon frustrate consistent documentation. Researchers have used GPS-marked dives and repeated sweeps to track debris, noting patterns in currents and sediment displacement. While some drifting coffins correspond with these patterns, others appear suddenly and disappear just as quickly, eluding tracking. High-resolution photography captures their presence with clarity, but even then, the object's sudden movement or submersion within wrecks prevents a complete understanding of their behaviour. For divers, encountering a coffin among the wrecks is a moment that combines unease, awe, and disbelief, leaving an indelible impression shaped by both history and the eerie environment. The play of light across twisted steel, coral formations, and slowly drifting coffins produces a surreal tableau. Divers often report an overwhelming quiet, punctuated only by their own breathing or the sound of water shifting around submerged structures. The psychological weight of being surrounded by relics of war, both human and mechanical, imbues each observation with a sense of reverence and tension, where the boundary between the historical and the uncanny blurs. Even decades later, the coffins continue to appear sporadically, moved by forces both visible and hidden, defying explanation and haunting every exploration of the lagoon's quiet corridors. Each sighting reinforces the duality of the lagoon, a place of documented history and a theatre of uncertainty. While maps, wreck logs, and environmental data provide a framework for understanding, the drifting coffins remain an unpredictable element, observed but never fully controlled. Their presence reminds divers and historians alike that even a meticulously studied environment can harbour elements of enduring mystery. Amid the twisted steel and coral of Chuuk, these drifting coffins glide silently, as if guided by memories that refuse to rest. The red tide phantom of the Gulf of Oman. A crimson haze drifted through the water, shapes moving within it that seemed to pulse with intent, neither fish nor shadow entirely. Only later did divers realise these phantom forms were appearing in the waters of the Gulf of Oman, where seasonal blooms of microscopic life tint the sea in deep, unearthly reds. The phenomenon has baffled both local fishermen and marine biologists alike, as it seems to emerge without warning, transforming familiar waters into a spectral landscape where visibility is limited and perception becomes unreliable. Witnesses describe the shapes as fleeting and elusive, sometimes lingering just long enough to evoke a sense of awareness before vanishing into the dense red-stained depths. Clusters of microscopic dinner flagellates swirled densely in the bloom, their movement driven by currents and nutrient-rich upwellings, creating a living stain that could shift suddenly with the wind or tide. These algal blooms occur seasonally, often following heavy rainfall or unusually warm water temperatures that trigger plankton proliferation. Historical records show that red tide events in the Gulf of Oman are not uncommon, yet the consistent appearance of phantom shapes within them remains unexplained. The interplay of biology and environment establishes a stage where perception can transform ordinary marine activity into a haunting spectacle, setting the scene for reports that have persisted for decades. Divers recount fleeting encounters with shapes that seem to drift deliberately among the red-tinted water, sometimes darting or hovering as if aware of their observers, producing an unsettling sense of consciousness within the bloom. Some describe elongated shadows that stretch beyond the size of any nearby fish, moving independently of the currents. Others report formations that appear to react to movement, dispersing when approached and reassembling in silence once the diver passes. The consistency of these reports across separate expeditions suggests that, while part of the experience can be attributed to perception in low visibility, there is a recurrent pattern that invites closer investigation. Reflections and refractions of sunlight through the dense plankton sometimes exaggerate forms, casting shadows or outlines that appear animated, and what seems a phantom might be a trick of light interacting with tiny motile organisms. Sunlight penetrating even shallow waters creates a constantly shifting mosaic, bending and diffusing through the water column in ways that alter the appearance of every object. Divers have recorded moments when simple schools of fish or drifting jellyfish appeared magnified or distorted, yet even controlled studies cannot replicate the specific shapes described as the phantom, leaving open the possibility of unexplained optical phenomena. Tiny bioluminescent organisms are sometimes present within the red tide blooms, producing faint flashes of light that pulse sporadically when disturbed by currents or passing divers. These microlights, nearly invisible in normal conditions, can combine with the dense crimson water to create the appearance of moving shapes that seem alive, even in total darkness. Observations recorded with low-light cameras show patterns that suggest motion independent of larger creatures, and divers often report sudden shimmering outlines that vanish as quickly as they appear. This bioluminescence, coupled with the bloom's density and colour, adds a subtle but striking layer to the phantom phenomenon, blurring the line between biological reality and perceived spectral presence. Larger marine animals, from schools of fish to jellyfish and squid, move through these blooms, their bodies absorbing and scattering light in ways that create distorted silhouettes, amplifying the impression of a conscious drifting presence. The Gulf of Oman hosts an array of mid-sized predatory fish, cephalopods, and planktonic feeders, each interacting differently with the dense red tidewater. Divers note that even ordinary movements of these creatures can appear eerily deliberate, as the bloom magnifies their presence and shadows ripple across the surrounding water, producing shapes that appear disconnected from any natural rhythm. Reports from fishermen and divers over decades describe the same spectral shapes emerging whenever red tides peak, suggesting a recurring phenomenon that blends natural biology with perception in ways still difficult to explain. Historical logs dating back to the 1970s describe crimson-stained waters in which unusual shadows appeared to move against the current. Fishermen recall vessels navigating cautiously, noting shapes rising from the bloom that seem to avoid or follow them in ways inconsistent with normal fish behaviour. These accounts reinforce the notion that the Gulf of Oman's red tides harbour more than mere plankton, and that the phenomenon has become a quiet, enduring mystery of the region. Researchers collecting water samples and deploying submersibles have recorded unexpected variations in light and movement, confirming the bloom's density but leaving certain shadowy movements unaccounted for by current knowledge of plankton behaviour. Thermocline variations, salinity gradients, and nutrient layers create complex pockets of water movement that can lift or suspend organic matter, occasionally forming shapes that appear to move with purpose. Despite high-resolution imaging and systematic observation, some of the shapes seen by divers do not correspond with known marine life or physical patterns, maintaining a level of unexplained activity that invites both scientific scrutiny and imagination. For those who dive amid these blooms, the water seems alive, thick with colour and motion, the phantom silhouettes weaving through the crimson currents, creating a disorienting, almost hallucinatory environment. Divers often report an initial calm that quickly turns eerie as the bloom's colour saturates their field of vision and shadows seem to shift independently. Sounds are muffled and visibility diminished, intensifying the sensation that the water itself has acquired a strange consciousness. The combination of colour, movement, and partial obscurity fosters an atmosphere where the ordinary and the unexplainable are inseparable, leaving divers with an experience that is at once scientifically intriguing and profoundly unsettling. Even with modern monitoring and careful documentation, sightings continue to appear sporadically, revealing a mystery that persists where biology and perception intersect, a phenomenon as mesmerizing as it is inexplicable. The red tide phantom appears and disappears, guided by forces both understood and unknown, reminding all who witness it that the ocean is as capable of illusion as it is of reality. Even with decades of observation, no single explanation accounts for the consistency, scale, and peculiarity of these shadows in the bloom, leaving the Gulf of Oman as a realm where scientific knowledge and the uncanny coexist. Through the restless currents of crimson tides, the phantom glides, a silent enigma that defies full scientific understanding. The anchor chain that won't corrode. Divers first noticed the chain when their lights swept across the seabed, gleaming in stark contrast to the surrounding rusted wreckage, its surface untouched by decades of saltwater exposure. The anomaly immediately drew attention, not merely for its pristine condition but for the unsettling sense it conveyed. Here was an object that should have succumbed to corrosion long ago, yet it remained unyielding, almost deliberate in its preservation. Observers compared it to the other metallic remnants scattered across the floor, corroded and jagged, and the stark difference heightened both curiosity and unease. Some whispered that it was a fluke of metalwork, while others feared it might be evidence of forces beneath the sea that defy ordinary understanding. Records suggest the chain was deployed during mid-20th century naval exercises, forged from heavy iron links meant to anchor supply vessels, yet its precise composition has remained largely undocumented. Naval logs detail standard iron usage, but none mention any special treatment or coating, raising questions about how the chain survived decades in open water while nearby vessels and anchors deteriorated rapidly. The surrounding seabed is littered with corroded anchors, hull fragments, and chains that have succumbed to the relentless saltwater environment, making the chain's preservation all the more perplexing. Even older archival reports from divers in the 1970s noted the chain's unusual condition, confirming that this was not a recent or isolated observation. Inspecting it closely, divers could feel the rough texture of pitted metal nearby, while the chain itself was smooth, cold, and unyielding, almost impossibly preserved beneath layers of silt. The contrast was tactile as well as visual. Iron that should have eaten away under decades of chemical interaction remained firm under gloved hands. The links bore no signs of rust, no flaking, and minimal biofouling, defying what might be expected from ordinary exposure. Photographs taken during dives revealed glints of light reflecting along the chain, as if it were freshly forged rather than decades old, a surreal image amid the corroded debris around it. The water around the chain carries high salinity and mineral content, with currents that churn the seabed relentlessly, conditions that should have corroded even the hardest alloys long ago. Seasonal shifts bring temperature fluctuations and localized upwelling, creating areas of turbulence that expose metal surfaces to oxygen-rich water. Even ordinary marine organisms, from small crustaceans to burrowing worms, contribute to metal degradation over time, yet the chain appears immune. Its location, resting in one of the most chemically active pockets of the sea, should have accelerated corrosion, making its preservation a matter of scientific intrigue. Laboratory analysis confirmed the chain was composed of standard iron and trace steel elements, with no obvious alloying that would account for its resistance, leaving researchers puzzled. Metallurgists examined samples, looking for traces of nickel, chromium, or protective plating, but findings matched ordinary industrial iron. Electrochemical tests were conducted to detect any self-generated protective films or unusual conductivity, yet nothing explained why nearby iron objects corroded while this chain remained intact. Scientists speculated about hidden variables, from localized microbial communities to subtle chemical anomalies, but the truth remains elusive, and the chain continues to resist both corrosion and complete understanding. Underwater cameras and long-term sensors have captured subtle biofilm layers forming along the chain's surface, composed of bacteria, algae, and microscopic invertebrates that appear to establish a protective shield. Unlike typical corrosion-accelerating biofilms, these layers seem to inhibit rust rather than promote it, creating a microecosystem uniquely adapted to the chain. Researchers have noted that water temperature, oxygen saturation, and local mineral concentrations coincide precisely with the chain's location, suggesting a delicate balance that may contribute to its remarkable preservation. Divers have observed that even minor disturbances in this environment, such as strong currents or sediment displacement, momentarily alter the biofilm's integrity, yet the chain quickly returns to its untouched state, as if the sea itself actively maintains it. Historical parallels exist in scattered accounts of submerged anchors or ship fittings that defied corrosion, yet none share the combination of location, exposure, and inexplicable preservation seen here. In some harbours, iron fittings buried in anaerobic mud resisted oxidation, but those examples rely on sediment protection, unlike the chain suspended above a shifting seabed. Reports from naval historians cite rare cases where bronze or treated metals lasted decades, yet the chain in question was ordinary iron. The accumulation of these anomalies has created a quiet fascination within the diving and research community, a sense that this object is both ordinary and profoundly extraordinary at the same time. Speculation ranges from protective biofilms formed by marine microbes to rare electrochemical conditions within the seabed, yet no experiment has been able to fully replicate the chain's remarkable resilience. Some researchers hypothesize that specific microbial colonies may secrete compounds that inhibit rust formation, a phenomenon observed in controlled laboratory tanks. Others consider the possibility of subtle magnetic or electrochemical fields concentrated along the chain's length, discouraging oxidation. None of these theories can fully account for the consistency of its preservation or explain why similar chains in identical conditions corrode normally, leaving the phenomenon suspended between science and mystery. Witnessing the chain juxtaposed against the corroded seabed, divers often speak of an unsettling sense of permanence, as though time itself had chosen to leave this object untouched, while all else decayed. The pristine links gleam faintly in the dive lights, creating an almost surreal image amid the jagged rust of other metal. Many divers describe a sensation of reverence, or even fear, as if the chain were a sentinel from another age, immune to the natural laws that govern the rest of the underwater world. Its presence prompts questions that cannot be answered simply by observation. Why this object? Why here? And how has it resisted the inevitable decay that defines the ocean's passage of time? Expeditions return year after year, recording the chain's unchanged state, a stubborn anomaly that resists explanation, even with modern technology and meticulous study. Measurements, photographs, and samples confirm the findings of decades past. The chain remains intact, an enduring testament to a mystery that straddles the line between material science and the unexplained. Researchers continue to document it, hoping that future chemical analysis or advanced imaging might yield a clue, yet each dive reinforces the paradox. The chain remains unchanged, ordinary, yet inexplicably perfect. The chain lies undisturbed, an iron enigma that refuses to bend to the will of salt, time, or science. The Bimini corridor's silent footsteps. A diver paused mid-glide, noticing faint depressions etched into the sandy floor, shapes that seemed deliberate yet vanished when the current shifted. At first, they appeared insignificant, subtle disturbances in the sediment easily attributed to underwater currents. But as the diver traced them with a careful eye, the depressions began to form sequences, lines, and curves that suggested intention rather than random movement. The corridor stretched outward, a series of limestone formations on either side, and the tracks wound through it as if an unseen presence had walked its length. Only later would the divers learn that these impressions had been recorded by others years before, each observer noting the same strange patterns that seemed to defy natural explanation. Among the team, whispered theories surfaced, ranging from displaced sediment to the improbable notion of footprints left by unknown visitors long ago. Some speculated that small marine creatures might have created the formations, but the size and spacing of the depressions far exceeded anything known in local fauna. Currents and sand slippage could account for minor irregularities, yet these tracks persisted even in unusually calm conditions. The divers exchanged uneasy glances as they realized the mystery was not just visual but spatial. The impressions maintained a cohesion and alignment that suggested some kind of purpose or intelligence at work beneath the surface. Archival maps and explorer journals hinted at similar anomalies, their descriptions vague yet eerily consistent with the tracks now observed beneath the waves. Early 20th century explorers noted linear depressions in shallow areas near the Bimini Islands, while local fishermen referred to paths in the sand that appeared and disappeared with the tides. The consistency of these accounts across decades lent credibility to the current sightings, creating a link between the modern observations and historical documentation. Even the oldest maps, hand-drawn and imprecise, seem to mark certain regions as unusual or noteworthy, hinting that the phenomenon had been noticed long before modern diving equipment could confirm it. Recent hydrographic surveys of the Bimini corridor reveal subtle underwater ridges and depressions that align with the patterns of the footprints, suggesting a geological template that may amplify or preserve traces in unexpected ways. Currents in the corridor occasionally create low-pressure pockets, allowing sand to settle differently than surrounding areas, yet these ridges alone cannot fully account for the precise spacing and directional consistency observed by divers. Notably, some of the tracks appear to extend over areas where the limestone bedrock rises sharply, a region previously thought too irregular to retain clear impressions. This combination of natural topography and unusual track fidelity has led researchers to hypothesize that unique interplay of sediment, water flow, and geological formation may be preserving the traces far beyond ordinary expectations. Camera lights danced across the sand as divers documented each indentation, careful not to disturb the fragile patterns or erase the subtle evidence. Measurements were taken, sketches were made, and sonar imaging captured the tracks in 3 dimensions. Despite meticulous recording, the tracks remained unpredictable, shifting in ways that suggested ongoing activity or environmental influence. Divers described a strange sensation of following an invisible guide, where every step revealed a new depression or a subtle continuation of the previous track, as though the corridor itself was alive with memory or intent. Over multiple dives, recurring shapes and spacing suggested a pattern, a rhythm that hinted at intentional movement rather than random sediment flow. Some sequences appeared to mimic human stride, while others deviated in ways that made no anatomical sense. The tracks meandered along the limestone ridges, occasionally intersecting with natural depressions and then diverging into deeper channels. These patterns compelled divers to compare notes meticulously, mapping every detail to see if a larger design or logic emerged. Yet each expedition only added layers to the mystery rather than resolving it. Scientific probes and sonar imaging revealed depressions that defied standard geological explanations, their regularity inconsistent with typical underwater erosion. Tests on sediment compaction, water flow, and current impact confirmed that natural forces alone could not produce such uniform spacing or directionality. Sonar scans indicated that some impressions extended into sub-corridors and crevices, spaces inaccessible to ordinary human activity, raising questions about what or who might have created them. While marine scientists could account for some anomalies as optical illusions or transient disturbances, the overall consistency remained unexplained. Local legends speak of travelers and mysterious figures who once roamed these waters, and some theorists suggest the tracks may echo a forgotten human presence beneath the waves. Tales of ancient pathways, submerged settlements, or explorers lost to the tides circulate among locals, often dismissed by outsiders as myth. Yet the convergence of historical accounts, divergent reports, and physical evidence lends a weight to these stories that is difficult to ignore. The tracks seem to resonate with memory and history, as if the sand itself holds traces of past journeys, silently preserved for those willing to notice. Divers often recount an unsettling sensation of being watched, the tracks guiding their gaze along the corridor while the shadows of the limestone formations deepen the feeling of silent company. Some describe a fleeting awareness, as though invisible observers move just beyond the periphery of their vision, vanishing whenever attention is focused directly upon them. The combination of shifting light, undulating sand, and the faint echoes of underwater currents creates an almost hallucinatory effect, reinforcing the impression that the corridor harbours more than simple depressions in the sediment. Year after year, new observations emerge. Footprints shift, disappear, and reappear, leaving those who follow them suspended between wonder and unease. Each expedition uncovers subtle variations, yet the fundamental mystery remains intact. Scientists, divers, and historians continue to return, hoping to understand the tracks, to determine whether they are natural, human, or something else entirely. The corridor holds its secrets well, and the deeper one ventures, the more insistent the impression becomes that the silent footsteps are watching, waiting, and guiding, unseen yet undeniable. The corridor stretches onward, holding its silent footsteps as if time itself refuses to claim them. The depth calls of Lake Baikal. Frozen tundra stretches endlessly across Siberia, where Lake Baikal lies like a dark mirror, reflecting the pale winter sun in solemn silence. It is the oldest and deepest freshwater lake on Earth, holding nearly a fifth of the planet's unfrozen surface freshwater and plunging to depths of more than 1,600 meters. Its walls of limestone and shale rise abruptly from the water, forming vertical cliffs that hide shadows no diver has fully penetrated. In this quiet, isolated expanse, technical divers have reported sounds unlike anything produced by wind, ice cracking, or underwater currents. A low-frequency hum, resonant and persistent, emanating from the abyss below. Locals speak of it in hushed tones, as if acknowledging a voice too ancient to be understood, yet impossible to ignore. The hum was first formally noted in 1982 during a series of seismic surveys conducted by Soviet geologists. Instruments recorded oscillations at frequencies far below the audible range, repeating in long, irregular pulses. Researchers initially attributed the phenomenon to tectonic activity, noting that Baikal lies along a rift zone, where the Eurasian and Amurian plates slowly diverge. Yet the sound's characteristics defied ordinary seismic explanation. It fluctuated in ways that mirrored no known tectonic pattern, and its source appeared to shift, migrating across the lake's floor with no predictable trajectory. Technical divers venturing into the southern basin reported experiencing the vibrations firsthand, sometimes accompanied by a sense of spatial disorientation, as though the lake itself subtly rejected their presence. Ice conditions add another layer of peril and mystery. During winter, the lake's surface freezes over, with sheets often exceeding 1 meter in thickness, and the cracking of the ice produces a chorus of booms that can be heard for kilometers. Beneath this fractured surface, the hum persists, indifferent to the ice's seasonal transformations. In 2007, a team from the Russian Academy of Sciences descended to 350 meters with specially designed submersibles to trace the origin. Their recordings revealed a strange modulation, almost as if the pulses were interacting with the lake's unique underwater topography. Baikal is renowned for its underwater canyons and rocky promontories, with cold, oxygen-rich layers trapping currents in ways that create pockets of unusual acoustics, yet the hum seemed unaffected by these formations, maintaining clarity and directionality that baffled oceanographers and limnologists alike. The lake's extraordinary biodiversity also casts a shadow over the mystery. Baikal is home to thousands of endemic species, including the translucent Baikal seal, or nerpa, which dives to extreme depths for hours at a time. Divers have often noted that these seals respond to the hum in strange ways. Some retreat to the lake's walls, as if avoiding an unseen presence, while others seem drawn toward the source, circling it cautiously before disappearing into the blackness below. Attempts to correlate the sound with biological activity, such as mass movements of fish or swarms of amphipods, have yielded no explanation. Instruments sensitive to sonar and hydroacoustic signals detect no large-scale movement sufficient to produce the vibrations. Historical accounts add a layer of unsettling continuity. Russian naval logs from the 19th century occasionally reference singing waters in Baikal, describing tones heard under ice during winter expeditions. Indigenous Buryat folklore speaks of the deep's call, a voice emanating from the lake that beckons the curious, often to vanish for days at a time. While these stories are unverifiable, they suggest that the phenomenon has long been acknowledged, recorded in language that seeks to personify an otherwise inexplicable presence. For divers who descend today, this legacy lends the lake an almost sentient quality, an awareness that seems to respond to intrusions into its remote depths. Modern dives are not without technical challenges. The southern basin of Baikal reaches pressures over 160 atmospheres, necessitating the use of reinforced submersibles and mixed gas diving to prevent nitrogen narcosis. Visibility is generally excellent thanks to the lake's clarity, yet the combination of depth, pressure, and the persistent low-frequency hum can create disorientation and vertigo. Several divers have reported hearing the sound within their helmets, sometimes accompanied by faint rhythmic pulses felt through the body, a sensation that cannot be easily explained by sonar reflections or mechanical resonance. These experiences have contributed to a growing tension among those who explore the lake, a sense that the water is both alive and indifferent, offering glimpses of an intelligence or force that may lie far beyond human comprehension. Geologists have speculated on other sources. Methane seeps along fault lines, produces vibrations, and subaqueous landslides can generate low-frequency acoustic energy. Yet measurements taken during dives and from anchored sensors fail to match the consistency and migratory patterns of the hum. In addition, isotopic studies of gases collected from the lake floor indicate no anomalous concentrations that would account for the scale and intensity of the pulses. Even sophisticated sonar mapping fails to identify structures capable of producing the hum mechanically, leaving open the possibility that it is generated by something entirely unknown. The phenomenon has attracted attention from researchers outside Russia as well. In 2014, an international team equipped with autonomous underwater vehicles detected micro-variations in water density and temperature that seemed to coincide with the sound's appearance. Some of the scientists proposed the theory of underwater resonance in deep fissures, where geological formations act as natural amplifiers. Yet the effect remained localized, shifting unpredictably across different sectors of the lake floor, defying precise mapping or replication. For divers, this unpredictability transforms exploration into a delicate balance between scientific inquiry and existential caution as the lake refuses to be fully measured or contained. For those who descend into Baikal's silent depths today, the hum is more than a curiosity. It shapes the dive, altering perception and focus, commanding a measure of respect usually reserved for the most remote corners of the ocean. Instruments can chart currents and temperature layers, cameras can record the stark grey expanses of rock and ice, yet no technology captures the essence of the sound itself, nor the subtle way it seems to respond to human presence. To surface again is to leave only partial knowledge behind, fragments of data that tease at understanding while preserving the lake's secrets intact. The mystery endures in every recorded pulse and every diver's hesitant tale as the lake whispers in a language no one has deciphered. The trench sphere of the Philippine Basin. The Philippine Trench plunges into the Western Pacific with a darkness so complete it erases the concept of light, a vertical abyss that has challenged submersibles and human curiosity for decades. In this shadowed expanse, a team of technical divers and robotic submersibles made a discovery that would confound the maritime community. A perfectly smooth metallic sphere, half buried in fine sediment, resting at a depth where sunlight has never touched. Its presence was first noted on a routine sonar sweep in 2016, when a glimmer reflected off the trench floor in a pattern that suggested a symmetrical, unnatural form. As the divers approached, cameras and instruments struggled to reconcile what they saw with known geological processes. The orb seemed to belong to neither Earth nor human industry, yet it lay inert, unyielding to their touch. The descent to the sphere required specialized equipment capable of withstanding pressures exceeding 1,000 atmospheres. Submersibles designed for extreme deep-sea exploration maneuvered through narrow channels between ridges, their lights cutting through the water to reveal fractured rock faces and drifting plumes of sediment. Visibility was limited to mere meters, yet the orb's metallic sheen reflected the submersible's beams in a way that drew the eye with unnatural precision. Divers recorded its diameter at roughly 2 meters, a near-perfect sphere with a surface so uniformly smooth that no known machine or natural process could have produced it under the conditions of the trench. Sediment partially concealed its base, suggesting it had been settled in place for an indeterminate period, yet the surrounding strata showed no evidence of human interference or recent geological upheaval. Preliminary analysis through remotely operated vehicles included magnetometer readings, X-ray fluorescence, and spectrographic imaging. Each attempt yielded inconclusive results. The orb did not appear to contain iron, nickel, or titanium in proportions consistent with known alloys. Some measurements suggested elemental ratios not catalogued in standard geological databases. Divers noted that the object emitted a faint, uniform metallic sheen when illuminated, yet no discernible energy, heat, or magnetic field was detectable. Even the ocean currents seemed to skirt it, forming subtle eddies around its base, as if the water itself hesitated to cross an invisible boundary. Any attempt to scrape or probe the surface left no impression. The material resisted pressure far beyond what would deform ordinary metals. The trench environment amplified the mystery. The Philippine Trench, one of the deepest oceanic trenches on the planet, is a site of intense seismic activity, with frequent minor tremors and occasional undersea landslides. Geologists confirmed that such activity could explain sediment shifts, but could not account for the sphere's smoothness or geometrical perfection. Natural concretion of metallic minerals in the trench is documented, yet these formations invariably exhibit irregular surfaces, crystalline edges, or porous interiors. Nothing in the known natural history of the area could explain the orb's uniformity, nor its isolation, as sonar surveys revealed no similar objects within a radius of several kilometers. Marine life interacted with the object in curious ways. Deep-sea fish, usually indifferent to mechanical objects, appeared to avoid the immediate vicinity of the sphere. Crustaceans and amphipods congregated in the disturbed sediment nearby, though none touched the metallic surface. On board, divers observed this behaviour in recorded footage. noting that the orb seemed to influence movement patterns in a subtle but undeniable manner. One ROV pilot reported a faint electrical sensation in the instruments when hovering close, though calibration checks eliminated any equipment malfunction. The sphere, though immobile and silent, seemed to impose an invisible rule over the environment immediately surrounding it. Historical and contextual references deepen the enigma. The trench has been explored intermittently since the 1960s, largely by Japanese and US research teams mapping seismic activity and studying benthic life. No prior expedition recorded a similar anomaly. Among oceanographers, reports of unidentifiable metallic objects at extreme depths are exceedingly rare, with most documented cases later attributed to human debris, meteorites, or misread sonar. In contrast, the trench sphere exhibits none of these characteristics. No weld seams, no markings, no identifiable corrosion patterns. Its discovery challenged assumptions about the deep-sea environment, forcing scientists to consider possibilities previously relegated to fringe theories or speculative fiction. Attempts to remove or manipulate the sphere have proven equally confounding. Robotic arms could nudge the exposed portion, yet the sphere would not budge beyond a few centimetres, and the base remained embedded, unyielding to leverage or suction. Calculations based on weight, volume, and sediment density suggest a mass beyond what any submersible or lifting device currently deployed could manage. Even if it were hollow, its composition defied the principles of known metallurgy. Divers' notes indicate a pervasive unease when attempting to interact with it, a psychological tension heightened by the isolation of the trench and the oppressive darkness surrounding the descent. Scientific hypotheses have emerged, each more tentative than the last. Some propose the sphere may be a byproduct of unknown hydrothermal processes, a metallic concretion shaped under extraordinary pressure. Others suggest it could be extraterrestrial, deposited long ago, and partially assimilated by oceanic currents. Each explanation faces immediate challenges. Hydrothermal formations fail to achieve geometric perfection, and no meteoritic record corresponds to an object of this nature in the region. Even the possibility of a lost experimental human device is improbable. Archival records show no submersibles or probes capable of reaching such depth that could produce or deposit an orb of this scale. The sphere's presence has transformed the approach to exploration in the Philippine Basin. Sonar mapping now incorporates anomaly detection. Divers conduct pre-dive psychological preparation for extended exposure to unexplained phenomena, and international teams confer over comparative data to exclude mundane explanations. Each mission yields more images, more measurements, and more questions as the orb remains impervious to scrutiny. Its silence is as profound as the surrounding trench, an absence of motion or signal that draws the human eye and imagination alike. The more researchers attempt to categorize it, the more the object resists understanding, standing as a testament to a domain of the deep that has yet to yield its secrets. The trench sphere of the Philippine Basin remains a singular enigma, a polished metallic sentinel in a world of darkness, provoking wonder, speculation, and unease in equal measure. Every dive adds fragments of knowledge, yet the essential truth of its existence eludes even the most thorough investigations. It rests in silence, its origin unclaimed, a testament to the deep that no human knowledge can yet explain. The vanishing plane in the Straits of Florida. A glint of metal appeared on the sonar screen, sharp and unmistakable, drawing the dive team's attention to a silhouette that should not have been there. At first, they thought it was debris from a passing cargo vessel, or a section of an old shipwreck, but as the submersible maneuvered closer, the shape resolved into something wholly unexpected, a fully intact aircraft, resting on the sandy floor of the Straits of Florida. The fuselage was horizontal, wings slightly buried in sediment, instruments visible through the open cockpit canopy, yet there was no evidence of recent human activity or any indication of how it had arrived there. For divers accustomed to finding remnants scattered or decayed by time, this was an anomaly, perfectly preserved in a place no flight records seemed to acknowledge. As the submersible approached, the fuselage revealed itself in astonishing detail, intact and undisturbed, its instruments frozen in a moment-long past. The tail number, once decipherable, was partially obscured by barnacle growth, yet the team confirmed it matched no reported missing aircraft in the region's archives. cameras captured the plane's smooth metallic surfaces glinting under the submersible's lights, while the sonar signature suggested a mass and density that defied natural explanation. Around the aircraft, sediment remained relatively undisturbed, as if the plane had settled centuries ago or had been placed with meticulous care. Divers noted the eerie stillness of the water, the unusual absence of typical benthic life in the immediate vicinity, giving the impression that the plane had become an artifact of another world rather than a recent addition to the seafloor. Currents twisted unpredictably around the descent path, forcing divers to calculate every maneuver against pressure, depth limits, and the fragile stability of the seabed. The Straits of Florida are notorious for their shifting thermoclines and strong tidal flows, which can carry sand and debris with surprising force. Technical divers relied on tethered submersibles, equipped with thrusters and precise navigation systems, often inching along centimetre by centimetre to avoid stirring sediment that would obliterate visibility. Even minor errors in buoyancy or course adjustments risked losing sight of the plane entirely, an unnerving reality as the team documented every angle and reading for later analysis. The delicate balance between human intervention and the ocean's power added a palpable tension to every movement. No flight logs, no missing aircraft reports, and no documented salvage operations accounted for an object of this kind lying at that depth. Historical research uncovered sporadic mentions of missing private aircraft in the 1970s and 1980s, but none corresponded to the location or condition of the discovery. Military and civilian records were equally unhelpful, offering neither explanation nor leads. Archivists and aviation historians alike were stumped, noting that even controlled crashes or emergency water landings leave some traceable pattern. Here, there was none. The aircraft had somehow evaded the extensive record-keeping of aviation authorities, as if it had never existed beyond the moment it settled on the sandy bottom. When the next dive team returned, instruments pinged emptiness where the plane had been, and the cameras captured nothing but the soft sway of sand over an unbroken seabed. Divers scanned the area meticulously, probing with sonar and magnetometers, but the readings were inconsistent, as though the mass had simply vanished into the surrounding sediment. No evidence of movement or physical displacement was visible, yet the contrast with previous documentation was undeniable. Some theorized that microcurrents or undersea turbulence could have shifted the plane, but such forces are typically insufficient to transport a fuselage intact across even short distances. The disappearance was sudden, complete, and deeply unsettling. Marine engineers and oceanographers offered theories: sudden sediment slumps, unseen microcurrents, or anomalies in water density capable of masking massive objects. Each hypothesis, however, faltered under scrutiny. The Straits of Florida are well charted, and the currents, though strong, follow predictable patterns that have been mapped in extensive studies for decades. There was no known mechanism by which an object of this size could vanish entirely without leaving a trace. Even sediment collapse, common in deep channels, would produce observable disruption and displaced material, none of which was found in repeated surveys. The experts could only speculate, each theory more improbable than the last. Light warped and instruments flickered, creating a disorienting effect for divers, as if the very water resisted the rules of physics. Helmets recorded brief electrical interference, and camera lights sometimes appeared to elongate or shift in ways inconsistent with depth and angle. Experienced submersible operators and technical divers compared these sensations to disorientation, commonly induced by deep currents or optical illusions, yet the phenomenon persisted despite careful calibration. The effect was subtle but real, enough to unsettle even the most seasoned observers and contribute to the growing impression that the plane had been removed by forces beyond human understanding. Photographs and sonar maps told one story, the water told another, leaving each team with a sense of something that existed only to vanish again. Researchers debated whether the disappearance was a fluke of natural forces, an overlooked environmental anomaly, or something altogether inexplicable. Every new dive, every updated map, only deepened the mystery, preserving the event as one of the few recorded maritime disappearances in which both presence and absence were equally documented. The Straits of Florida, usually mapped and monitored to the centimetre, had claimed an object that defied measurement, leaving the human eye and mind to grapple with its sudden erasure. It had been there, then it had not, and the sea remained the only witness to its disappearance. the black coral walls of Palau. Sunlight filters through tropical waters, casting shifting shadows over dense coral forests. Yet amidst the chaos, perfectly straight channels carve through black coral with a precision that defies expectation. The formations lie in a remote section of Palau's reef system, where depths reach 20 to 30 metres and visibility can fluctuate with the slightest current shift. At first glance, they resemble natural fractures or gullies shaped by currents, but their angles, uniform spacing and length quickly betray a pattern no ordinary marine process could produce. Light glances off the black coral's glossy surface, highlighting the sharpness of each channel's edge as if the reef itself had been sculpted with tools rather than by water and time. Black corals, slow-growing and delicate, typically twist and branch unpredictably, forming labyrinthine structures that respond to current, light and nutrient flow. In contrast, the walls here rise and descend with geometric regularity, their paths intersecting at near-perfect angles. Colonies stretch meters along straight corridors, with widths consistent across dozens of channels. Some formations even curve gently in parallel arcs, suggesting intentional design rather than chaotic growth. Marine biologists note that black corals can live for centuries, but such longevity alone cannot account for the uniformity and scale of these formations. The more scientists measure and observe, the more these walls appear to defy the biological and geological rules that normally govern reef structures. Submersible-mounted cameras and sonar arrays mapped each channel meticulously, revealing lengths and intersections that no known current or erosion pattern could produce. Photogrammetry allowed divers to reconstruct 3D models of the formations, exposing subtle undulations and precise alignments invisible to the naked eye. Sonar readings showed consistent spacing between channels, angles approaching 90 degrees at several junctions, and occasional straight stretches exceeding 10 meters without deviation. Divers documented the patterns layer by layer, noting how sediment settled uniformly along the bases and how tiny creatures moved around the structures as if respecting an unseen boundary. Each measurement reinforced the unnerving sense that the channels had been crafted deliberately, yet there was no evidence of machinery, tools, or human presence. Previous surveys of Palau's reefs noted unusual formations, but none matched the scale or geometric regularity of these black coral walls. Scientific literature contained scattered reports of linear coral formations in the Indo-Pacific, often attributed to strong tidal flows or ancient tectonic activity, yet the Palau corridors are far more precise and interconnected than any documented analogue. Local dive logs from the 1980s and 1990s describe straight passages and canal-like depressions, but do not explain their formation. Archaeologists and marine historians find no record of underwater construction or artifact placement in the area. Even the most seasoned reef ecologists are forced to acknowledge that these structures occupy a liminal space between known biology and inexplicable design. Unusually, chemical assays of the water surrounding the channels revealed microgradients of trace metals and minerals, concentrations subtly different from the ambient reef, as if the coral itself had been influenced by a hidden and persistent force. Scientists took water and sediment samples, noting slightly elevated levels of manganese and rare earth elements along the edges of the channels, enough to suggest a localized geochemical anomaly. These elements are typically found in slow-seeping hydrothermal deposits or volcanic substrates, yet no active vents exist near this section of Palau's reef. The concentration was low but consistent, tracing the pathways of the channels with near mathematical precision. Researchers speculated that these chemical variations might have guided coral growth subtly, yet the linearity and sharp angles of the formations far exceeded anything that could result from known geochemical processes. Even the tiniest disturbances in current or nutrient flow would have left irregularities, yet the channels maintained their symmetry as if the anomaly itself imposed order. As divers swam along the channels, shadows shifted in ways that disoriented them, and instruments occasionally registered subtle anomalies in pressure and light. The labyrinthine corridors played tricks on depth perception, with parallel walls appearing to converge or diverge, depending on the angle of observation. Fish swirled around the outer edges but rarely entered the channels, and small crustaceans seemed to follow the straight paths with unusual consistency. Divers reported a quiet unease, a sense of being watched by the reef itself, as though the coral walls enforced a geometry the ocean had not dictated. Every turn revealed another junction, another perfectly formed corridor, and each measurement only deepened the mystery. Oceanographers proposed explanations ranging from centuries of slow erosion to chemical influences that might affect coral growth, yet each hypothesis faltered in the face of angles and uniformity that could not arise naturally. Currents here are strong but variable, too inconsistent to carve the straight, evenly spaced lines observed. Sediment movement occurs gradually, yet the channels cut cleanly through fully grown colonies without disturbing surrounding branches. Even accounting for biological mutation or accelerated growth due to nutrient flow, no known process produces corridors with such precision. Researchers are left with a puzzle that straddles the line between natural wonder and the possibility of intentional formation. Captured in fine detail through photographs and 3D models, the structure only reinforced the feeling that something inexplicable had shaped its submerged corridors. Teams cross-referenced measurements with tidal charts, sediment maps, and current models, hoping to reconcile natural forces with what they observed. Nothing in the data explained the straight lines, the uniform spacing, or the elegant intersections. Each dive raised new questions. How had the structures endured centuries without significant overgrowth or collapse? And why did marine life interact with them differently than with surrounding coral? The more researchers probed, the more these questions multiplied, leaving the formations as a silent testimony to an unknown origin. The coral channels stretch in impossible precision, a silent testament to forces the ocean refuses to reveal. The silent submarine fleet of Scapa Flow. In the aftermath of World War I, the German fleet lay interned in Scapa Flow, a massive harbour in the Orkney Islands, only to be deliberately scuttled in 1919, sinking dozens of submarines and warships into the cold, dark water. The act was intended to prevent the vessels from falling into Allied hands, yet what remained on the seabed has since become more than a historical artefact. Divers returning to these waters in recent decades have reported something far stranger than the presence of rusting hulls, vibrations that resonate through the metal as though the submarines themselves were alive. The sensation is subtle at first, a low hum that seems to echo through the water column, but persistent, defying explanation by tidal flow, currents, or underwater machinery. The harbour itself is a natural labyrinth, shaped by glacial activity that carved deep channels and basins, with sediment layers slowly shifting over a century. Strong tidal currents funnel through narrow passes, creating whirlpools and eddies that can transport silt and debris unpredictably. Yet even under these dynamic conditions, the vibrations reported by divers do not correlate with the environment. Hydrographic surveys, sonar mapping, and current models confirm the strength and direction of the flows, but none account for the regularity and persistence of the hum. The water here is clear, but cold, often near freezing at depth, and the interplay of temperature, salinity, and density gradients further complicates underwater perception, giving divers the sense that the submarines are both a physical and psychological presence. Hull measurements, rivet patterns, and steel thickness define the skeletons of these vessels, yet decades of corrosion and marine colonization have transformed them into ghostly structures. Barnacles, sponges, and seaweed coat the once gleaming steel, and small fish weave through open hatches as if conducting a silent inspection. Acoustic studies suggest that submerged metal of this size can produce low-frequency resonance when stressed, but the vibrations recorded here do not align with expected mechanical or environmental sources. Some hulls hum independently of others, while neighbouring submarines remain silent, a discrepancy that defies conventional explanations of resonance propagation in fluid media. Divers report that touching the steel can amplify the sensation, with subtle tremors coursing through gloves and hands, heightening the sense that the wrecks are communicating or reacting to the presence of the living. Remarkably, magnetic surveys of the wrecks have revealed subtle anomalies around certain hulls, where compass needles deviate slightly as divers approach, suggesting that the remaining steel retains irregular fields shaped by decades of corrosion and seawater interaction. The magnetic signatures are inconsistent, varying between submarines and even along the same hull, as if time and saltwater currents had sculpted invisible fingerprints into the metal. Historical records confirm the original steel was highly magnetized, intended for navigation systems and machinery alignment, but the current variations far exceed what would be expected from ordinary degradation. Some divers have reported that their digital compasses flutter or swing inexplicably near these magnetic zones, sometimes aligning with the hums in ways that hint at an underlying connection between metal, resonance and residual energy. Oceanographers suggest that such anomalies could arise from electrochemical reactions between iron and seawater, yet the precision and localized nature of these fields remain unexplained. Divers report low-frequency vibrations coursing through the metal, sensations that seem both physical and perceptual. Instruments occasionally fluctuate, pressure gauges, magnetometers, even depth sensors, without correlating to environmental triggers. Some experienced submersible pilots describe a sensation akin to standing on a steel bridge during a distant earthquake, the hum travelling through the vessel rather than the water itself. In certain compartments, echoes of the vibrations bounce against bulkheads, amplifying into a strange rhythmic resonance. The combination of sound, metal and water creates an immersive phenomenon that is impossible to replicate outside the wrecks, and yet it remains unaccounted for in any naval or oceanographic study. Naval records, salvage logs, and wartime maps confirm the positions of the scuttled fleet, yet no documentation hints at acoustic phenomena capable of producing the persistent hums now recorded. After the scuttling, several submarines were partially salvaged, and others remain largely intact. Archival photographs reveal the placement of each hull, yet modern sonar scans show subtle inconsistencies in sediment levels around vibrating wrecks, suggesting either natural shifts or phenomena still unrecognized. The historical context is clear. These submarines were sunk intentionally, carefully, and their positions meticulously documented, but history offers no account of metal whispering beneath the waves a century later. Scientists and naval engineers have proposed explanations ranging from acoustic resonance in decaying steel to sediment displacement or microseismic activity, yet none fully account for the consistency, timing, or intensity of the vibrations. Resonance in hollow metal structures can produce hums, but the lack of uniformity and the seemingly independent behavior of individual hulls challenge this assumption. Sediment shifts occur slowly and unpredictably, and even minor seismic events would produce broader, more chaotic patterns than those reported. The phenomenon remains unquantified, appearing at random, yet with a persistence that defies chance. Each new dive, every measurement, reinforces the impression that these wrecks are resonating in an intentional manner, or at least inexplicably organized. The submarines stand as both monuments and enigmas, their skeletal hulls silently narrating a century-old history while vibrating in a language that humans have yet to decipher. Divers emerge from the water with logbooks full of numbers, photographs of barnacle-covered steel, and descriptions of hums that cannot be replicated, leaving both scientists and explorers to confront the uncanny intersection of history, material, and the sea. The vessels are simultaneously inert and active, relics of a human conflict and participants in a mystery that stretches beyond engineering and oceanography. Even in the deepest silence, the metal whispers, carrying echoes that no eye can see and no instrument can fully measure. The skeleton without a wreck in the Red Sea. A solitary skeleton rests on a Red Sea sand slope, its presence a silent defiance of both known shipwrecks and maritime records. No equipment lies nearby, no tattered clothing or personal effects mark a history, and yet the bones are preserved in a way that suggests decades submerged, untouched by the currents that sweep the surrounding seabed. The figure lies in a position that implies no struggle, no drift, and no natural accumulation, as if the ocean itself had placed it here with deliberate care. Divers and survey teams first noticed it during routine mapping, its stark contrast to the rolling dunes and coral outcrops immediately raising questions about its origin and the forces that had allowed it to remain undisturbed. Currents here sweep with unrelenting precision, shifting sand and silt across the seabed and sculpting ripples that march for kilometers, yet they have left this isolated figure untouched. Seasonal flows accelerate in narrow channels, capable of transporting debris, wreckage, and even whole vessels under the right conditions. Water temperature varies with depth and latitude, creating stratified layers of density that influence how objects drift, yet these same forces seem to have abandoned the skeleton, leaving it in a location that conventional oceanography cannot fully explain. The seabed around the remains is largely featureless, with only faint ripple marks and scattered shells, yet the bones appear unnaturally aligned, suggesting a stability that defies both hydrodynamic models and sediment transport predictions. Microscopic analysis of the surrounding sand revealed a layer of mineralized sediment that had accreted unevenly around the bones, as if the skeleton had resisted natural burial while the ocean slowly sculpted the seabed. Samples taken from beneath and around the remains showed a subtle difference in grain size and mineral composition compared with nearby undisturbed sand, suggesting a localized chemical or physical anomaly. Trace amounts of iron and phosphate appeared slightly elevated near the skeletal remains, though there is no evidence of decomposition fluids typical of submerged bodies in open water. Researchers speculate that a combination of sediment compaction, chemical microgradients, and slight shifts in water density may have created a protective niche, yet no current model fully explains why it occurred here and nowhere else along the slope. This discovery adds another layer of enigma, suggesting that the skeleton's preservation is not merely a product of isolation, but may involve interactions between the human remains and the surrounding environment that science has yet to define. The surrounding topography offers no shelter, no crevice, no depression where a body might naturally come to rest and remain undisturbed for decades. Nearby coral outcrops rise in chaotic formations, providing obstacles for drifting debris, yet the skeleton lies in an open sweep of sand, exposed to every eddy and surge that passes through the channel. Even small changes in tidal direction would normally nudge objects along predictable paths, depositing them against ridges or in crevices. Here, however, the remains remain immobile, a fixed point in a constantly shifting underwater landscape. Sediment accumulation patterns around the skeleton curve in subtle, impossible arcs, indicating that the surrounding environment interacts with it in a way that is precise, silent, and unexplained. Centuries of naval logs, trade records, and wartime accounts reveal no vessel or accident capable of depositing a human in this spot. The Red Sea has long been a corridor for commerce and conflict, with countless ships, cargoes, and crews passing through its waters. Historians have catalogued hundreds of wrecks along the coastal corridors, yet none align with the skeleton's location. Maritime authorities, reviewing modern shipping routes and diving records, have found no reports of lost divers or shipwrecks in the immediate area. This absence of precedent leaves the skeleton not only isolated in space, but also unanchored in historical narrative, a human figure suspended in a liminal zone between documentation and the unknowable. Fish weave past the bones without disruption, and sediment patterns curve around the figure in ways that suggest both stability and unnatural placement. Tiny invertebrates colonize the surrounding sand, but the skeletal remains themselves are largely free from incrustation, maintaining their original orientation and spacing. Water flow over the site produces minimal disturbance, as if the bones exist in a microenvironment shielded by invisible currents or subtle density layers. Divers report a strange visual phenomenon. Light refracts differently across the skeleton compared to the surrounding sand, creating a faint halo effect that enhances the sense of isolation. Instruments measuring temperature, salinity, and current velocity record nothing unusual, yet the skeleton remains fixed, as if the seabed itself conspires to keep it in place. Even the marine life exhibits subtle anomalies around the skeleton, with small crustaceans avoiding the immediate vicinity and certain fish adjusting their schooling patterns in a zone barely larger than the body itself. Biologists conducting long-term monitoring noticed that burrowing organisms such as sand crabs and polychaete worms avoid the skeleton in ways inconsistent with normal sediment distribution. Nearby schools of juvenile fish alter their movements slightly when passing over the site, creating a faint but measurable difference in local current turbulence. No chemical deterrent has been detected, and yet the behaviour persists across multiple seasons. This suggests that the skeleton has become a subtle ecological anomaly, interacting with its surroundings in ways that are perceptible to marine life, but imperceptible to standard instruments, further enhancing the sense that it exists outside conventional natural expectations. Underwater landslides, sudden eddies, and rare density currents can move debris vast distances, yet none can account for the exact preservation and alignment observed here. Sedimentologists note that even small slumps typically leave identifiable traces, displaced silt, broken shells, or scattered detritus. None of these markers appears around the skeleton, and its position has resisted seasonal monsoon surges that routinely rearrange dunes elsewhere along the slope. Oceanographers speculate that the combination of microcurrents, density stratification, and sand compaction might explain part of the phenomenon, yet these explanations fall short of reconciling the complete immobility and preservation of human remains in such an exposed environment. The skeleton sits in perfect isolation, an enduring paradox that confronts scientists with the ocean's capacity for both concealment and revelation. Every dive, sonar scan, and sediment core reinforces the impossibility. The bones occupy a location that should have been transient, yet they endure in stasis. Even modern mapping techniques, including photogrammetry and 3D sonar modelling, fail to offer clues about how it arrived there or why it remains. The anomaly challenges assumptions about currents, sediment transport, and human interaction, and each measurement only magnifies the questions surrounding its presence. Researchers leave the site with data and models, yet no explanation emerges, only the stubborn, silent reality of a human body where none should exist. No chart, record, or explanation can account for how a single human came to rest here, alone and untouched, beneath the silent waves. The shifting sand rivers of the Persian Gulf. When divers returned to a familiar site along the Persian Gulf, they found the sandy seabed altered beyond recognition, entire channels of sand having vanished as if erased overnight. The site, once mapped with painstaking care, now bore new formations, winding troughs, crescent-shaped ridges, and stretches of bare, compacted sand where coral and shells had previously flourished. Initial assumptions leaned towards storms or human interference, yet weather reports and maritime activity logs confirmed calm conditions, leaving the sudden transformation unexplained. Survey teams documented the changes with sonar, cameras, and 3D mapping tools, capturing ephemeral features that seemed to materialize and vanish without warning. The Gulf itself is relatively young in geological terms, formed during the Holocene as sea levels rose and flooded low-lying river valleys, leaving behind vast stretches of soft sediment that continue to shift with each passing tide and monsoon. These shallow plains are composed of fine-grained sand, silt, and carbonate particles, sculpted over millennia by tides, wind-driven waves, and occasional storms, yet normally exhibiting predictable stability. Seasonal currents advance and retreat with a measured rhythm, forming gentle ripples and shifting small dunes, but large-scale alterations rarely occur without strong external forces. The seabed is interspersed with patches of seagrass, coral mounds, and shell beds that anchor the sediment, creating a relatively stable environment for marine life. Despite this, the sand rivers observed in recent decades demonstrate a fluidity and suddenness that challenge conventional sedimentology. Their breadth and depth suggest movements of immense volume, reshaping the seafloor overnight in ways that resist explanation. Survey teams noted that entire dive locations, mapped and revisited for years, would shift or disappear entirely, leaving no trace of coral, shells, or sediment contours once recorded. Divers describe feeling disoriented as familiar landmarks vanish or reconfigure, forcing them to recalibrate their orientation for each dive. At times, channels appear abruptly, twisting like subterranean rivers frozen in sand, only to collapse or fill in days later. Historical dive logs, when cross-referenced with modern surveys, reveal a pattern. These formations appear unpredictably yet consistently, suggesting an unseen force orchestrating their movement rather than random, isolated events. Repeated sonar sweeps and time-lapse photogrammetry reveal subtle oscillations in the sand's surface before channels appear, yet no current models can replicate the formation patterns, leaving even sophisticated simulations at a loss. Multibeam sonar scans further reveal deep, meandering channels cutting across previous topography with geometric precision that no natural storm could explain. The channels extend for hundreds of meters, their curves and bends too regular to arise from simple water flow or tidal scouring. Side-scan sonar images capture subtle sediment layering along the edges, implying directional movement that occurs over hours rather than weeks. Even the smallest dunes atop the channels demonstrate patterns inconsistent with typical Gulf sediment deposition, leaving oceanographers puzzled over the energy and mechanism capable of creating such sudden formations. Faint, persistent rumblings emerged from seabed acoustic sensors, tracing the path of channels yet to appear amid the ever-shifting sands. Seismometers and hydrophones placed along the seabed detected low-frequency sounds correlating with sudden shifts in sediment, as though the sand itself communicated the flow of invisible currents. Analysis showed that microgranular avalanches move silently beneath the surface, reshaping channels faster than divers or sonar scans can capture. The patterns are irregular yet repeatable, suggesting a hidden system of sediment transport influenced by temperature gradients, tidal surges, and subtle pressure variations. These acoustic signals provide the only clue that the sand rivers are active forces, moving relentlessly even when the waters above appear calm. Currents, temperature layers, and salinity gradients were meticulously measured, yet the forces calculated could not account for the rapidity or direction of the sand's movement. Stratification in the Gulf produces subtle density gradients that influence how sand and silt drift, but these effects are slow and predictable. The observed changes, however, defy models. Sand shifts laterally, forming deep troughs and elevated ridges almost instantaneously, leaving even experienced marine geologists questioning the limits of their understanding. Some researchers have proposed rare internal waves or short-lived turbidity currents as partial explanations, yet even these theories fail to reconcile the precise, large-scale patterns that appear repeatedly. The Persian Gulf has long been a corridor for trade, oil transport, and naval navigation, yet no human activity could account for the sudden disappearance of entire seabed features, creating hazards for modern vessels and explorers. Navigation charts quickly become unreliable as these shifting sand rivers carve and erase routes used by cargo vessels and fishing boats, while archaeologists face the constant threat of losing centuries-old shipwrecks buried in the sand before they can be properly documented. Oil rigs monitor seabed stability meticulously, yet surveys reveal that even in heavily trafficked areas, sand rivers form without warning, obliterating markers and reference points and reminding observers of nature's subtle but ungovernable power. Repeated observations suggest that these sand rivers are not isolated incidents, but part of a pattern of ephemeral formations, fleeting landscapes that appear, shift, and vanish without warning. In some regions, divers have witnessed channels flowing across one another, forming temporary networks of branching paths that rearrange daily. Sediment cores taken before and after these events show abrupt stratigraphic changes, confirming the speed and scale of movement. Crustaceans burrow cautiously at the edges of newly formed channels, while schools of small fish navigate the ephemeral corridors as though reading an invisible map, hinting at adaptations to a landscape that vanishes and reappears with uncanny speed. Even with modern mapping, precise measurements, and repeated dives, the shifting sand rivers of the Persian Gulf remain elusive, reshaping the seafloor and defying both prediction and explanation. Scientists, navigators, and divers alike confront the Gulf with humility, acknowledging a rhythm of natural change that exceeds human understanding. Every scan, map, and dive confirms the pattern. These sand rivers appear and vanish, sculpting ephemeral corridors that are as mesmerizing as they are impossible to pin down. The seabed, fluid yet solid, obedient to invisible forces, seems to exist in a perpetual state of quiet metamorphosis, a world of sand and water that does not pause for observation. Neither instrument, chart, nor log can truly measure the shifting sands, leaving the Gulf's secrets to vanish as quickly as they emerge. The lost monolith of the Aian Ridge. The first team to descend the steep slope of the Aian Ridge reported a formation rising from the seafloor with startling regularity. A stone monolith that seemed both deliberate and immense, immediately catalogued as the lost monolith of the Aian Ridge. Divers and submersibles approached cautiously, noting its towering presence and angular precision that contrasted sharply with the surrounding jagged rock and sedimented mounds. Coordinates were recorded, measurements taken, and photographs captured, leaving no doubt in the minds of the explorers that they had encountered a structure far removed from natural randomness. Yet, even as data streamed to the surface, an unsettling question lingered. How could a single formation, so clearly documented, vanish beneath the waters that bore it? Scattered across the ridge were subtle ridges of compacted silt, small pinnacles of limestone, and patches of dark sand that shifted with every current, forming a seascape both treacherous and strangely symmetrical, as if nature had practiced mimicry in preparation for the monolith's presence. The seabed slopes unpredictably, with sudden drops and plateaus that can distort sonar readings and confuse divers' orientation. Currents along the ridge are subtle yet persistent, slicing through sediment and occasionally shifting smaller formations. Temperatures at depth remain relatively stable, yet minor variations in salinity and flow can influence visibility and even the behavior of suspended particles. In this dynamic environment, the presence of a monolith, so geometrically precise, seemed at once impossible and undeniable. Sonar imaging and direct photography revealed a structure taller than a two-story building, its smooth faces aligned with a precision that suggested deliberate construction rather than geological happenstance. The material mirrored the surrounding limestone in composition, yet the angles and flat planes were unlike anything the ridge's natural forces could produce. The submersibles were equipped with multi-beam sonar and laser scanning instruments, each pulse reflecting off the monolith's faces, capturing millimeter-level details in 3 dimensions. Light beams traced sharp edges and angles with unparalleled clarity, confirming the structure's geometric perfection against the rugged randomness of the surrounding seafloor. Measurements indicated a height of nearly 12 meters, with each face forming near-perfect right angles, the geometry difficult to reconcile with purely natural sedimentary processes. Subsequent expeditions returned to the coordinates repeatedly, measuring, triangulating and scanning with multi-beam sonar, yet each attempt revealed only undisturbed sand, scattered rock outcrops, and no trace of the monolith once so vividly recorded. GPS readings confirmed the team had returned to the precise location, and depth measurements matched initial dives, yet the structure itself had disappeared. Some divers speculated that sediment flows had buried the formation, but sonar revealed no anomalies in layering or density. The seafloor appeared as it had prior to the monolith's first discovery. The disappearance was total and absolute, leaving the monolith in a paradoxical state, documented yet absent. From shifting tectonic plates to sudden sediment deposition, or perhaps the collapse of an isolated outcrop, experts in geology and underwater archaeology debated possible explanations. Yet none accounted for the combination of features observed during the initial dive: the monolith's perfect geometry, its sheer scale, and the complete lack of sedimentary disruption in the aftermath. Some suggested that subtle currents could have gradually shifted sand to obscure it, but divers found no trace of sediment buildup in the immediate area. Beneath the surface, gentle currents circulated in irregular loops, temperature gradients fluctuated slightly with depth, and microtectonic tremors rippled through the ridge. Yet none could account for the precise disappearance of a structure measured and recorded mere days before. Historical context added further intrigue. The Aegean Sea has long been a cradle of civilization, with evidence of Minoan and Mycenaean maritime activity, submerged settlements, and ritual sites scattered across the seabed. Nearby, fragments of submerged walls and columns hinted at smaller human settlements, yet none approached the monolith's scale or precision, reinforcing the inexplicable nature of its existence and disappearance. Some researchers speculated it might be a remnant of a submerged temple or ceremonial platform, but no comparable structures have been found in proximity. The monolith's presence implied either an advanced ancient knowledge or a geological anomaly that mimicked deliberate construction with uncanny precision. Despite meticulous mapping and repeated dives, the ridge conceals its secret, leaving experts to reconcile precise documentation with absolute absence, a paradox that challenges both science and belief. Submersibles retracing the original survey path reported normal sediment layering and expected rock formations, yet the memory of photographs, sonar images and diver logs continued to suggest a presence no longer detectable. Attempts to digitally reconstruct the monolith in 3 dimensions confirmed its impossibility to dismiss. The data exists, the formation was measured, and yet reality offered nothing. The ridge had become a place where certainty and absence coexisted uneasily. Faint, uneven vibrations registered on acoustic sensors placed along the ridge, aligning with the monolith's previous location and hinting at unseen activity beneath the seabed. These signals offered no direct clues but reinforced the sense that something, geological or otherwise, had once occupied the space, leaving traces detectable only through indirect observation. Even in the absence of visible evidence, the ridge seemed to remember the monolith, echoing its former presence through microtremors and subtle changes in sediment compaction, as if the seafloor itself recorded events beyond human perception. The lost monolith of the Aian Ridge endures in records, sonar images and diver reports, yet in the waters themselves it has vanished, as if the seafloor refuses to acknowledge its own architecture. Scholars debate whether it was a fleeting geological event, a tectonic oddity, or evidence of human activity now erased by time and water, but the truth remains beyond reach. Divers describe a peculiar sense of displacement when returning to the site, an awareness that the seabed may conceal forces or histories that challenge human comprehension. Each expedition underscores the enigma. Something enormous and deliberate was there, and yet it is gone. Resting in the deep, the monolith persists, a stone enigma resisting the limits of both instruments and recollection. The creature tracks beneath the Berry Islands. Sunlight danced across the shallow waters of the Berry Islands, refracting in shifting patterns that glimmered on sand and rubble. Gentle winds stirred the surface, creating ripples that intersected at subtle angles, while occasional cloud shadows drifted across the banks, revealing faint depressions too precise to be accidental. Suspended particles shimmered in the water, forming patterns that suggested hidden movements beneath, yet the forces at work remained imperceptible to the naked eye. Even the smell of salt and the faint hum of distant waves seemed to mark the presence of something unusual, an invisible architect shaping the sands in ways that would only become clear with closer examination. Tidal flows generally sculpted the banks into gentle undulations and meandering channels, producing a seascape familiar to scientists and divers alike. Yet in several stretches, the sand resisted these forces, remaining unnaturally smooth. Microtopographical surveys revealed variations in grain size, with fine calcium carbonate mixed with tiny coral fragments, compacted in some regions and loosely settled in others. Minute ridges ran perpendicular to the grooves, subtle signs of displacement hinting at a force capable of altering the sediment without leaving obvious evidence. Layers accumulated over centuries had preserved these anomalies with extraordinary fidelity, making the tracks appear simultaneously ancient and freshly formed. The grooves themselves emerged gradually from the landscape, first as faint, narrow lines, then extending into long, straight depressions, each measured wider than an adult diver's span and penetrated deeply into compacted sediment. Some curved slightly or branched at precise intervals, forming a pattern that suggested deliberation. Sonar imaging traced miles of uninterrupted lines, their edges remarkably sharp, cutting through older layers without disturbing the surrounding sand. Even minor tidal disturbances and seasonal storms left them largely intact, defying expectations of how such a sandy environment should behave over time. Cores taken from the grooves revealed an unexpected stratigraphy, sand layered with microscopic shells and foraminifera fragments, some dating back centuries. Analysis showed that some sections contained denser compaction than the surrounding sand, suggesting repeated passage or pressure over time. Trace elements indicated occasional influxes of slightly warmer water, hinting at episodic currents or underwater seepage that may have interacted with the tracks. These findings provide rare insight into the long-term persistence of the grooves, and imply that whatever created them operated over decades, perhaps even centuries, leaving the seafloor as a living archive of forces still beyond scientific understanding. Marine biologists examined the tracks with both curiosity and skepticism. Large rays, dugongs, and benthic fish were considered, yet none could account for the scale, depth, or linear precision observed. Crustaceans and burrowing organisms might shape the sand on a small scale, but their movements could not produce continuous miles of perfectly parallel grooves. Comparative studies of other islands revealed occasional linear depressions, yet none matched the combination of scale, regularity, and persistence seen here. Each observation only deepened the mystery, confirming that the tracks were not the product of known marine life. The puzzle deepened as oceanographers contributed their own observations. Microcurrents and eddies typically generate ripples and arcs, while storms produce chaotic sediment patterns. The grooves, however, ran across these forces in straight lines, unaffected by the twisting and swirling of the water above. Water movement around the depressions created subtle changes in suspended particles, producing faint streaks that shimmered in the sunlight. Yet these minor distortions offered no clue to the origin, reinforcing the sense that an unknown mechanism had carved the sand with precision, far exceeding any documented natural process. The grooves exerted a subtle influence on the surrounding ecosystem. Small fish altered their swimming paths to avoid them, while burrowing crustaceans skirted the edges entirely. Larger predators moved over the lines without apparent response, leaving smaller organisms to navigate the strange terrain. Plankton concentrations shifted slightly along the channels, creating faint trails that reflected minor variations in water flow. Even minute changes in microcurrents suggested that the tracks were interacting with their environment in ways that defied simple explanation, leaving clear evidence of their presence while concealing the means of their creation. Human observation finally confirmed the track's existence and scale. Divers equipped with laser calipers, high-definition cameras, and sonar devices measured width, depth, and spacing with meticulous care. Submersibles mapped multiple miles of continuous impressions, documenting their orientation and uniformity across tidal cycles and seasons. Repeated dives verified the consistency of the features, with each new observation reinforcing the initial findings. Divers reported an unsettling sensation when moving along the paths, a vertigo of scale, an intuitive awareness that these markings reflected a deliberate force beyond human perception. Historical records offer faint parallels, though rarely as pronounced. Early Caribbean expedition logs describe straight gouges in sandy banks, often dismissed as natural oddities. Similar observations appear sporadically in Pacific dive surveys, yet none replicate the scale or continuity seen in the Berry Islands. Photographic and sonar evidence from these prior accounts is fragmentary, but the echoes suggest that linear seafloor patterns occasionally emerge in otherwise ordinary landscapes, hinting at a phenomenon that spans regions and eras. In the Berry Islands, however, the scale and clarity elevate the tracks into something both tangible and inexplicable, a feature that invites measurement yet defies interpretation. The implications of these formations challenge the boundaries of marine science. They question assumptions about sediment dynamics, species capabilities, and the interplay between currents and topography. Even as measurements confirm their reality, the origin remains uncertain. Speculation ranges from unknown or extinct marine species to entirely unrecognized physical forces, yet none account for the track's full characteristics. The evidence is concrete. Miles of linear impressions persist in an environment that should erase them, interacting with marine life, currents, and sediment in subtle but measurable ways. They are at once a product of the natural world and an anomaly beyond comprehension. Miles of unbroken tracks stretch across the banks, a silent testimony to a presence that no one has yet seen. The unexplained glow of the Japan Trench. The Japan Trench plunges into near impenetrable darkness, a chasm of crushing pressure and cold that stretches thousands of meters beneath the ocean surface. Submersibles and remotely operated vehicles descend along its steep walls, their lights cutting narrow beams through water that swallows colour and sound alike. It was during one such descent that an anomaly first appeared on the monitors, a faint luminescence, a soft, pulsating glow that did not match the known bioluminescent patterns of the abyssal fauna catalogued in this region. Initially subtle, the light flickered intermittently across camera feeds, moving in ways that suggested intent rather than randomness, drawing the attention of every operator in the control room. Scientific instruments detected the glow in multiple ways. Photometers recorded brief spikes in luminescence, while high-resolution cameras captured shimmering patterns along the trench walls and seafloor. Temperature sensors noted slight localized increases, mere fractions of a degree above the near-freezing baseline of approximately 2 degrees Celsius, coinciding with the light's appearance. Depth readings placed the source between 6,500 and 7,500 meters, in a zone where known organisms are sparse and mostly adapted to survive extreme pressure and nutrient scarcity. The anomaly seemed almost imperceptible, yet its repeated appearance defied expectations and demanded scrutiny. Operators and researchers sought conventional explanations. Bioluminescent jellyfish, copepods, and deep-sea squid are common in the trench's upper reaches, their patterns of light well documented. Even abyssal shrimp and amphipods emit light under stress or as part of mating displays. Yet none of these species move in straight, deliberate pulses covering hundreds of meters, or produce a synchronized shimmer with the rhythm observed. Geological explanations were also considered. tectonic gas seeps or hydrothermal vent activity can occasionally generate light through chemical reactions. The recorded intensity and rhythm, however, did not align with any known geological phenomenon, leaving observers with an unresolved puzzle. The glow itself revealed remarkable characteristics. It appeared as pale blue and faint green orbs, sometimes clustered, sometimes solitary, moving slowly along crevices and depressions. Each pulse lasted several seconds, followed by brief darkness, then repeated in irregular intervals. Its origin seemed mobile yet untraceable. Camera feeds revealed no discernible form or structure emitting the light. Mapping the phenomenon against the trench's contour revealed that the pulses avoided certain ridges while following gentle slopes, as if responding to the topography. Measurements indicated that the illuminated area could stretch over hundreds of meters, an expanse far beyond the reach of any documented deep-sea organism. Historical records offer scattered parallels. Japanese oceanographic teams in the 1980s and 1990s occasionally noted anomalous light readings in trench depths, dismissed at the time as sensor errors or particulate reflections. More recent expeditions recorded similar pulses, yet data remained incomplete, lacking high-resolution visual confirmation. Elsewhere in the Pacific, deep trenches have occasionally revealed unexplained luminescence, often attributed to microbial mats or rare chemical reactions. The Japan trench glow, however, is distinct in its regularity, scale, and apparent mobility, resisting all conventional classifications. Speculation within the scientific community spans biological, physical, and even unknown possibilities. Could an undiscovered species adapted to extreme pressures and darkness be generating the light? Microbial luminescence remains a candidate, though no samples collected from the area have yet matched the intensity or behaviour observed. Tectonic activity could intermittently release chemicals that react with seawater to produce brief illumination, yet the glow's mobility and pulse patterns contradict a static source. Attempts to collect samples using submersibles or remotely operated tools have been largely unsuccessful. The phenomenon seems to react or vanish under scrutiny, leaving the trench itself as the only consistent witness. Chemical analysis of water samples taken directly within the glow's vicinity revealed unusually high concentrations of dissolved manganese and trace amounts of rare earth elements. These minerals are known to catalyze faint chemiluminescent reactions under extreme pressure and low temperatures, a process rarely observed in natural deep-sea environments. Coupled with minor shifts in microcurrents, the chemical composition may intermittently enhance natural bioluminescence or generate weak luminescent emissions in sediment-dwelling microorganisms. The findings hint at a complex interplay between geology, chemistry, and biology, where subtle environmental variations could amplify or trigger the glow, offering partial clues yet leaving the primary mechanism frustratingly elusive. Observers report subtle psychological and sensory effects when monitoring the glow. Operators describe a peculiar vertigo when the orbs appear in peripheral vision on screens, a sense that the lights are aware of the submersible's presence, moving just enough to avoid observation. The near-total darkness of the surrounding trench amplifies the effect. Even the smallest reflection or shift seems significant, heightening the impression of deliberate movement. Submersible crews have recorded physiological responses, slightly elevated heart rates, fleeting unease, and an awareness of the immense pressure and isolation, emphasizing the surreal nature of the experience. Over successive dives, patterns have emerged. The glow pulses with a rhythm that is neither random nor strictly periodic. Some pulses coincide with minor shifts in microcurrents along the trench walls, though the correlation is inconsistent. In other cases, the light seems to pause, then resume with intensified brightness, suggesting a variable source or a reactive behaviour. Detailed mapping attempts combining sonar, high-definition video, and light intensity sensors reveal continuity over hundreds of meters and multiple dives. Yet despite precise documentation, the mechanism generating the glow remains unidentified, leaving open the possibility of either an unknown organism or an entirely unobserved physical phenomenon. Understanding falters at the Japan Trench, where each new observation raises more questions. Its crushing depths, near-freezing temperatures, and sparse population of organisms make it a place where science rarely encounters an anomaly. Yet here, in the deepest shadows, light persists. Carefully measured, repeatedly observed, and meticulously recorded, the unexplained glow resists classification, evoking wonder, frustration, and a profound sense of mystery. Every pulse, every shimmer, is a reminder that even in one of Earth's most thoroughly studied environments, secrets endure beyond human perception. Even as the cameras recorded every pulse and shimmer, the glow persisted in its own rhythm, indifferent to human scrutiny and to the crushing darkness that surrounds it. The Iron Whispers of the SS Richard Montgomery. The SS Richard Montgomery rests in the Thames estuary, a hulking skeleton of steel and explosives that has loomed as a silent hazard since the final months of the Second World War. Scuttled in 1944 with a full cargo of munitions intended for the Allied invasion of Europe, the ship was trapped on a sandbank, leaving over 1,400 tons of unexploded ordnance precariously embedded within its rusted hull. From the surface, the wreck is deceptively calm, its corroded silhouette drifting with the tides, yet beneath the waterline, divers and instruments report something far stranger than mere instability. Faint metallic sounds that seem to resonate from deep within the vessel, an auditory echo that has been aptly dubbed the Iron Whispers. The Montgomery was constructed in the early 20th century with riveted steel plates, a design typical of cargo vessels built for wartime expediency. Its hold was filled with bombs, shells, and detonators, carefully packed yet vulnerable to corrosion and structural stress over decades submerged in brackish waters. Historical records describe frantic attempts to refloat the ship and remove its cargo, efforts abandoned when the vessel became grounded on a shifting sandbank. Reports from the 1940s already noted odd noises emanating from the hull, though wartime urgency left these largely uninvestigated. Today, these murmurs are taken seriously, with careful observation revealing patterns that defy easy explanation. The wreck has aged visibly, its hull split in sections, superstructure collapsed, and decks partially buried beneath sediment. Strong tidal currents sweep over the site, influencing sediment accumulation and altering the acoustic properties of the surrounding water. Rust flakes drift like snow through the murky depths, and waterlogged timber and twisted metal add irregularities that refract light and sound. Sonar surveys reveal a labyrinth of collapsed holds and mangled beams, creating resonant chambers that could amplify even the smallest vibration. Yet the observed whispers often persist in ways that cannot be fully explained by tidal forces or structural shifts alone. Modern divers and hydrophone operators have documented these sounds in meticulous detail. Low-frequency metallic taps, sometimes rhythmic, sometimes irregular, seem to emanate from areas inaccessible without heavy equipment. Sonar imaging occasionally detects micro-movements in the hull that correlate with the sounds, though no visible source is ever confirmed. Hydrophones record faint pulses echoing through the steel plating, a resonance so precise it feels almost intentional. Multiple expeditions, including those using remotely operated vehicles equipped with vibration sensors and high-resolution cameras, confirm that these are not ambient water noises or equipment artifacts. The ship itself appears to be communicating in a language no one understands. Corrosion and metal fatigue provide only partial explanations. Structural engineers have mapped stress points across the wreck, identifying areas likely to creak or shift under tidal pressure. Certain sections of the hull do indeed produce sounds as plates flex and rivets snap, yet many of the reported whispers come from locations far removed from any stressed plates or known structural vulnerabilities. Chemical analysis of water in contact with the hull reveals iron oxide and other corrosion byproducts, some of which could influence acoustic transmission, but they do not account for the rhythmic quality, variable amplitude, or directional nature of the sounds. Government authorities maintain a cautious distance, enforcing an exclusion zone around the wreck and monitoring it for safety. The threat posed by the unstable munitions is real. Experts estimate that even a minor disturbance could trigger a chain reaction, scattering explosives into the estuary and creating a devastating detonation. Historical incidents in other munitions-laden wrecks serve as reminders of the danger. The presence of this latent hazard amplifies the sense of unease for those studying the whispers. Every dive must be planned with precision, and even minor deviations in current or ballast can result in close calls. Divers describe the experience as unnerving. The estuary water itself seems alive with tension, and when the whispers appear, they report a sensation of the ship exhaling or resonating with deliberate intent. Sound behaves differently underwater, travelling faster and with unusual clarity through metal, creating the impression that the hull is speaking directly into the diver's mind. Some report a faint vertigo or heightened awareness, the mind filling in meaning where none may exist. This human perception adds a layer of psychological tension, blending fact with the almost sentient impression of the ship beneath. Despite decades of monitoring, the phenomenon remains unexplained. Theories abound: minor explosive reactions within decaying munitions, underwater resonance of metal plates, and rare interactions between tidal currents and submerged structures. Each explanation accounts for fragments of the observed data, yet none fully replicate the combination of sound, rhythm, and location noted by divers and sensors. Regularly, the whispers defy expectations, appearing in areas thought too inert to produce sound, fluctuating with tides and currents in ways that suggest a complexity beyond ordinary physical processes. The SS Richard Montgomery persists as a reminder of history and mystery entwined. Its rusting hull holds echoes of wartime urgency, human oversight, and the unyielding passage of decades beneath the water. Even with the most advanced equipment, the whispers remain, teasing scientists, divers, and observers alike. The combination of documented hazard, structural decay, and unexplained acoustic phenomena transforms the wreck from a historical artifact into a living enigma, one whose voice can be heard yet never fully understood. The Montgomery lies under murky waters, its gentle hum carrying the weight of history untouched by time or tide. The guardian of the Yonaguni ruins. The Yonaguni formations rise from the depths off the southern coast of Japan, a labyrinth of terraces, steps, and angular platforms carved into sandstone and mudstone. Divers navigating the site often pause in disbelief, struck by the unnatural precision of the terraces, some extending over tens of meters with perpendicular faces and flat plains that defy simple geological explanation. Among these formations, a more unsettling phenomenon has been repeatedly reported: a dark, moving form, fleeting and elusive, glimpsed amid the shadows of the staircases and platforms. Witnesses have referred to it as the Guardian, a presence both deliberate and enigmatic, appearing and vanishing with a rhythm that suggests awareness, yet leaving no trace of biology or machinery. Geological analysis has confirmed the stone's composition, a dense sandstone interspersed with mudstone layers, eroded over millennia yet retaining sharp edges on certain terraces. Measurements reveal steps as high as 2 meters, with platforms stretching more than 20 meters in length and angles that approach 90 degrees in some corners. Proponents of natural formation cite tectonic uplift and seismic activity as shaping forces, while others argue for human modification, pointing to apparent alignment with cardinal directions and the precision of right angles. The ambiguity itself deepens the sense of unease, as even seasoned researchers struggle to reconcile the observable data with conventional explanations. Diver accounts are striking in their consistency. Independent teams, arriving years apart, have described seeing the form glide along the terraces or pause near a platform's edge before disappearing into shadow. Visibility at the site is often limited to a few meters due to suspended sediment and fluctuating currents, making identification of any creature or structure extremely difficult. Yet multiple observers note the same characteristics: a dark silhouette, smooth and deliberate movement, and an uncanny ability to remain partially concealed even in full light. These reports suggest a recurring presence rather than a sporadic illusion. Technical equipment corroborates some of these observations. Remotely operated vehicles with high-definition cameras have captured fleeting shadows that defy immediate identification. Sonar mapping reveals slight displacements of sediment or water around the terraces that correspond with diver sightings, though the form itself remains invisible on traditional scans. The currents of the East China Sea and local tidal fluctuations create natural distortions, but the patterns associated with the Guardian do not fully align with predictable hydrodynamics, implying an agent capable of movement independent of environmental forces. Comparisons with other underwater sites offer context yet fail to explain the phenomena. In locations such as the Caribbean or the Mediterranean, divers report glimpses of unknown fish or sudden shadows caused by shifting sediments. None, however, occurs within a geometric framework of terraces and steps resembling architectural design. The The combination of regularity in the formations and irregularity in the movement of the Guardian creates a unique tension, reinforcing the impression that the site is not merely a geological curiosity, but a stage for an enigmatic presence. Speculation within the scientific and diving communities spans several explanations. Some argue that optical illusions created by light refracting off angled terraces can account for perceived motion. Others suggest large eels, rays, or schools of fish might be partially responsible, though none fit the descriptions consistently reported. Attempts to capture the Guardian with continuous filming often fail. Cameras record only empty terraces, with the shape appearing only in fleeting glimpses. This elusiveness heightens both fascination and frustration, as the line between perception and reality blurs beneath the waves. The psychological impact on divers is profound. The verticality of the terraces, combined with dim, filtered light and narrow visibility, creates an otherworldly environment. Witnesses report a sensation of being watched, a creeping awareness amplified by the form's repeated appearances. Divers describe heightened attention to subtle currents, shifting shadows and the echo of exhaled air, all contributing to a sense that the ruins themselves are alive with intention. The Guardian, whether creature, optical anomaly, or something else entirely, exerts a presence felt as much as seen. The mystery deepens with repeated observations. Over the years, divers note that the form seems to follow certain paths along the terraces, sometimes pausing at specific ledges or recesses, then vanishing without a trace. Attempts to lure or illuminate it result in disappearance or avoidance, suggesting a responsiveness that remains unquantifiable. Each encounter adds to the narrative. A witness report here, a fleeting sonar blip there, a shadow slipping along an angular platform, together forming an accumulation of anomaly that challenges both scientific and experiential understanding. In the end, the Yonaguni formations stand as an intersection of history, geology, and unexplained phenomena. Measured terraces, documented seismic activity, and repeated independent sightings converge into a site that resists easy classification. The Guardian remains elusive, never fully captured, never fully explained, a figure glimpsed at the margins of human observation, yet intimately tied to the site itself. Whatever it may be, it moves through the ruins with deliberate intention, a presence as old and enduring as the stone upon which it passes. Among the terraces and stairways, the form moved once more, deliberate and unseen, leaving the ruins to hold their secrets beneath the shifting light of the ocean. The hollow cave that shouldn't exist in the Sulu Sea. The hollow chamber first appeared as an anomaly on a sonar scan, a vast cavity seemingly carved beneath the seabed of the Sulu Sea. Initially, researchers assumed a mapping error. The depth readings and echo returns suggested a space too large to exist without an entrance. Yet successive surveys confirmed the finding. The cave was real, a cavernous void beneath layers of limestone and sediment, yet entirely sealed from view. Divers sent to investigate encountered a disorienting paradox. No natural opening appeared to exist, yet the sonar repeatedly delineated walls, ceilings, and a floor stretching far beyond conventional expectations. This was the hollow cave that shouldn't exist. The Sulu Sea itself is a region of complex underwater topography. Tectonic activities, sediment deposition, and underwater currents have shaped a landscape of gentle slopes punctuated by isolated ridges and small canyons. Limestone outcrops dominate the area, often forming karst structures above water. But the formation of a submerged cavern of this magnitude, entirely enclosed and yet stable, defies conventional geological processes. Measurements indicated ceilings rising 5 meters above the seafloor, with lateral spans exceeding 30 meters in places, angles forming corners that seemed unnaturally squared for natural rock. Divers approaching the site reported immediate challenges. The water was warm but slightly turbid, with suspended silt that reduced visibility to under 3 meters in some areas. Currents moved unpredictably near the cave's walls, and a subtle, continuous echo of moving water seemed to emanate from within, even when instruments suggested the space was empty. Equipment readings fluctuated without discernible cause, pressure gauges registered minor spikes, and submersible compasses occasionally wavered, adding to the sense of unreliability and unease. Remotely operated vehicles provided a more precise view of the cavern. High-definition cameras traced the contours of the limestone walls, revealing smooth sections interrupted by unexpected fissures and ledges. Despite multiple attempts, no entrance could be located. The vehicles appeared to pass through areas that sonar mapped as solid rock, only to re-emerge within the cavity itself. Subtle anomalies in sonar returns suggested voids behind walls, but direct access remained impossible, creating the impression that the chamber might be a self-contained labyrinth with its own internal logic. The cave displayed other anomalies as well. Sensors recorded microcurrents within the hollow, fluctuating in ways inconsistent with tidal or wind-driven flow. Water temperature varied slightly in localized areas, and minute chemical differences suggested pockets of slightly lower salinity, perhaps caused by unseen freshwater seepage. None of these factors provided a complete explanation for the cave's existence or its inaccessibility. Divers reported sounds, low, rhythmic pulses or clicks, emanating from within, which seemed to respond to their movements yet remained untraceable. Hydrodynamic studies offered only partial insight. The Sulu Sea experiences complex layering of water masses, with denser, cooler water sinking beneath lighter, warmer flows. Normally, small depressions in the seabed or karst fissures can trap water and create localized currents, but the hollow chamber's size and enclosed nature should preclude the patterns observed. Flow modelling indicated areas where water appeared to accelerate along invisible channels, creating eddies and subtle vortices, but the origin of these movements remained undetectable. The cave behaved as though it possessed its own internal circulation, isolated yet persistent. The psychological impact on divers was notable. The confined enclosed space combined with minimal visibility produced disorientation, a distorted sense of scale, and the impression of unseen observers. Divers described the sensation of being guided, watched, or even nudged by invisible currents, their attention drawn repeatedly toward walls that should have been solid. A combination of sensory anomalies, echoing sounds, and optical distortions lent the cave a presence that was both alien and oppressive, amplifying the already enigmatic nature of the site. Speculation among scientists and experienced divers ranged widely. Some proposed a rare karst formation created by millennia of submerged erosion, though the lack of any natural entrance contradicted this theory. Others suggested unknown geological or chemical processes creating temporary hollow pockets beneath the seafloor, yet the chamber's stability over repeated surveys challenged such ideas. Some considered the cave a natural mirror of labyrinthine underwater channels elsewhere in Southeast Asia, but no known system matched the scale or sealed nature of this anomaly. Every theory accounted for fragments of the evidence, but none could explain the entirety of the cave's features. With every dive, the enigma grew, revealing nothing and raising more questions. Each dive, each ROV pass revealed consistency in measurements, yet unpredictability in perception. Instruments confirmed voids where solid rock should exist, but human experience contradicted this certainty. The cave's hollow interior, inaccessible entrances, and inexplicable internal currents created a puzzle that combined physical reality with sensory dislocation, leaving researchers questioning both the limits of geological understanding and the reliability of their own perceptions. After all investigations, the cave persisted as a contradiction, a space that could be mapped yet denied reality, simultaneously open and closed, observed yet ungraspable. Sonar, cameras and diver reports confirm its interior, yet the lack of entry combined with subtle sensory anomalies ensures the cave continues to defy conventional explanation. It is a chamber that embodies the tension between science and the inexplicable, a reminder that even in well-studied waters, nature can produce places that challenge comprehension. Though every instrument confirmed its hollow interior, no diver could locate an entrance, leaving the Sulu Sea with a secret that refuses to be touched or understood.